Do you remember the toys, gadgets, and games that filled your childhood? The ones that seemed to have vanished from the American home without anyone ever announcing they were leaving. This is a countdown of 100 of them. The plastic and tin and cardboard that shaped a whole generation of kids. The things you saved your allowance for and tore the wrapping off on Christmas morning. The ones that ended up at the bottom of a toy box and then disappeared for good. You will hear the ones you forgot you ever owned. You will hear the ones you begged your parents for on the way past the store window. Some were dangerous, some were clever beyond their price. All of them are gone now, or close to it. Let us count them down together, starting at number 100. Number 100, Viewmaster. You held it up to the light, pressed it to your eyes, and pushed the lever down with your thumb. The reel clicked forward, and a flat little photograph jumped into 3 dimensions. A grizzly bear standing in a river. The rings of Saturn, Snow White at the wishing well, so close you felt you could reach in. The Viewmaster arrived at the end of the 1930s, first sold as a scenic souvenir for grown-ups touring the national parks. A modern answer to the stereoscope your great-grandparents kept in the parlor. It found its real home in the hands of children. Each cardboard reel held 7 small stereo pairs, 2 nearly identical images that your 2 eyes fused into one scene with real depth. The clunk of the lever, the half-second of darkness between frames, the way you tilted the whole viewer toward the nearest lamp to brighten the picture, all of it is burned in. For a child before television saturated every room, this was a window onto places you would never go. The trouble was the reels. They scratched, they cracked. They slid behind the couch and were gone, and a full set cost more than most kids could keep track of. Still, the viewer took the whole world of an afternoon and shrank it into a red plastic rectangle you could hold in one hand. Today, a child swipes through 1,000 photographs on a glass screen before breakfast, and not one of them clicks, and not one makes you lean toward the light. Do you remember the toy that let you draw on a gray screen and then wipe the whole thing away with a single shake? The one waiting at number 99. Number 99, Etch-a-Sketch. 2 white knobs, a gray glass screen in a bright red frame, and hours of your childhood poured into a single wavering line. You twisted the left knob, and the line went sideways. You twisted the right and it climbed. Turn both at once, and if your hands were steady, you got a smooth diagonal, which was the hardest trick of all. The Etch-a-Sketch came out of the Ohio Art Company in the early 1960s, dreamed up by a French inventor, and sold to American kids by the millions. Inside was aluminum powder clinging to the back of the glass, and a tiny stylus moved by the knob scraped a clean line through it. When you were done, you turned it face down, shook it hard, and the powder settled back to a blank gray slate. That shake was the whole magic and the whole heartbreak. One careless bump, and the castle you had labored over for an hour was gone forever. Nothing saved, nothing kept. It taught patience the hard way. And it taught you that some things only exist while you are making them. The straight lines were easy, and the curves were nearly impossible, which is why every kid's masterpiece looked like a staircase. It traveled well in the back seat on a long drive, quiet and battery-free, which parents loved. Today, a tablet remembers every doodle a child makes and lets them undo any mistake. The Etch-a-Sketch never let you undo anything, and maybe that was the point. Do you remember the glowing pegboard that turned a dark bedroom into a tiny galaxy of colored light? Sitting at number 98. Number 98, Lite-Brite. You slid a black sheet of paper over the lit-up screen, and then you pushed colored plastic pegs through it one by one, and each peg lit up like a jewel. A clown, a sailboat, a butterfly with red and yellow wings. Lite-Brite came from Hasbro in 1967, and it worked on the simplest idea imaginable: a light bulb behind a grid of holes, and a stack of translucent pegs in a handful of colors. The paper templates had tiny colored dots printed on them, so you knew a blue peg went here, and an orange one went there, and if you followed the pattern you were rewarded with a glowing picture in a dark room. The best part came when you turned off the overhead light, and the whole thing blazed to life. The catch was that the pegs got everywhere. They rolled under the bed, they turned up in the vacuum cleaner, they were murder to step on with a bare foot in the dark. And once you used a paper sheet, the little punched holes meant it never looked as crisp the second time. Parents grumbled about the mess and the cost of refill pegs, but a child sitting cross-legged in a dark bedroom, watching a picture appear one glowing dot at a time, felt like an artist working in pure light. Today, a screen makes any color instantly, and needs no pegs at all. It also never asks a child to sit still and place one small piece after another until something beautiful arrives. Do you remember the game that lit up and beeped a longer tune each round and dared you to play it back? Waiting at number 97. Number 97, Simon. A round black disc the size of a dinner plate, split into 4 big lenses, red and blue and green and yellow. It lit one color and played a note. You pressed that color back, then it played 2, then 3, then a string so long your memory finally cracked and the machine let out a low, mocking buzz. Simon came from Milton Bradley in 1978, and its public debut was a launch party at the Studio 54 nightclub in New York, which tells you how much of a sensation it was meant to be. Inside was a simple computer chip playing a memory game that got harder every round. The 4 tones were tuned to sound pleasant together, so even the pattern you were failing to remember sounded like music. You played it alone on the floor, leaning in, whispering the colors to yourself. You played it against a sibling, taking turns until one of you broke. The frustration was real, and so was the small electric thrill when you finally matched a pattern 8 or 9 long. The lights were bright, the sounds were sharp, and the whole thing ran hot on a fat 9-volt battery that never seemed to last. Some kids found it maddening rather than fun, and the repetition could drive a parent out of the room. Today a phone holds 1,000 games with graphics like movies. None of them are as pure as 4 colored lights asking you to simply pay attention and remember. Do you remember the tiny oven that baked a real cake with nothing but a light bulb? Sitting at number 96. Number 96, Easy Bake Oven. It looked like a real kitchen range shrunk down for a child, and it actually cooked. You mixed a little packet of cake mix with water, poured it into a tiny pan, and slid it through a slot into the oven. Then you waited, watching through the window while an ordinary incandescent light bulb baked it into a real, small, warm cake. Kenner introduced the Easy Bake Oven in 1963, and the light bulb was the whole trick, throwing off enough heat to turn batter into a genuine dessert. The pan came out one slot and went in another, pushed along with a little tool because the metal got hot. That heat was the problem too. The bulb ran hot enough to burn a curious finger, and the small pans came out warm enough to sting. But the pride of it was enormous. A child who could not yet use the family stove had made something with their own hands and could carry a real cake to the table and watch a parent take a bite. It was often sold as a toy for girls, and plenty of boys wanted one too and quietly loved it. Refill mixes cost money, and a determined kid ran through them fast. Today a child can watch endless baking shows on a tablet and never once smell their own cake browning under a light bulb. The Easy Bake gave a small person a real result, warm and edible in theirs. Do you remember the big-wheeled trike that let you spin out sideways on the driveway? Waiting for you at number 95. Number 95, Big Wheel. Low to the ground, a fat plastic front wheel with pedals bolted right to it, and 2 smaller wheels in back. You sat almost on the pavement, legs stretched out front, and you pedaled like mad down the sidewalk. The big wheel came from the Marx Toy Company at the tail end of the 1960s, and it changed the whole feel of riding for a small child. Because you sat so low, you felt fast even when you were barely moving, and there was no way to tip over the way a 2-wheeler let you crash. The real trick every kid learned was the spin-out. You pedaled hard, yanked the hand brake on the right rear wheel, cranked the handlebars, and the whole thing slid around sideways in a scream of plastic on concrete. The sound of that hard plastic wheel grinding down the driveway is one of the great noises of an American childhood. It also wore that front wheel flat on one side if you spun too much, until the pedals thumped with every rotation. The seat had a few settings for a growing kid, and the plastic could crack in a hard winter. Parents liked how safe it was, low and slow and stable. Today a child is strapped into a helmet on a balance bike engineered by committee. The big wheel just wanted you to sit down, push off and slide. Do you remember the long sheet of slick yellow plastic that turned the back lawn into a soaking wet runway? Waiting at number 94. Number 94, Slip and Slide. You rolled out a long strip of thin, yellow plastic across the grass, hooked a garden hose to one end, and turned it on. Water trickled through little holes and sheeted across the whole surface until it was slick as ice. Then you backed up, took a running start, and threw yourself down belly, first to skid the whole length in a spray of cold water and cut grass. Wham-O put the slip-and slide on the market in 1961, and for a hot summer afternoon, nothing beat it. The setup was almost nothing, a hose and a flat patch of yard, and the payoff was a soaking, screaming, laughing pileup of neighborhood kids taking turns. You aimed for the far end, and usually shot right off it into the mud. The danger was real, and everybody found it out. The thin plastic over hard ground had no give, and a grown adult or a big kid landing wrong could get hurt badly, which is why the warnings got sterner over the years. But for a lightweight child, it was pure joy, the shock of the cold water and the impossible slickness under your stomach. Today, a backyard water park inflates itself with a blower and stands 8 feet tall. The slip-and slide was flat, cheap, a little dangerous, and somehow more fun than all of it. Do you remember the rubber man you could stretch clear across the room and watch slowly ooze back into shape, waiting at number 93? Number 93, Stretch Armstrong, a blonde, barrel-chested figure in little black shorts, and you could grab his hands and pull his arms out to 4 times their length. He stretched and stretched, thin as a rope, and when you let go he slowly, hypnotically shrank back to his old shape. Kenner released Stretch Armstrong in 1976, and inside that rubbery skin was a thick, gooey corn syrup gel that gave him his impossible stretch and his slow return. Every kid did the same 3 things. You stretched him as far as 2 people pulling could manage. You tied his arms in a knot around his own neck, and eventually, you cut him open to see what was inside, which ended him for good and left a sticky mess your mother found later. That was the whole arc of owning one. He was tough for a while, but a nick in the skin was fatal because the gel would slowly leak out, and he would sag and never bounce back. He was not cheap either, so a ruined Stretch Armstrong was a real loss. Still, there was nothing else like the feel of him, heavy and pliable and warm from your hands. He came molded into a coffin-shaped plastic tray, and you learned fast never to set him down anywhere near a sharp corner. Today, action figures snap into fixed poses and stay exactly as the factory made them. Stretch Armstrong invited you to test him to destruction, and most of us did. Do you remember the little plastic aquarium of instant pets you grew from a comic book packet, waiting at number 92? Number 92, Sea Monkeys. You saw the ad in the back of a comic book, a cartoon family of pink creatures with crowns and smiles, promising instant pets you could train. You sent away your money, waited weeks by the mailbox, then poured a packet into a little plastic tank of water and watched. And after a day or 2, tiny things were actually swimming in there. Sea monkeys were a kind of brine shrimp, sold as a novelty from the 1960s onward by a man who had already made a business of mail-order gags. The first packet cleaned and conditioned the water, the second held eggs that hatched into darting specks, and a third fed them as they grew. They never looked like the smiling cartoon family, of course. They were pale, wispy, comma-shaped swimmers you had to hold up to the light to see well. That was the letdown every kid felt, the gap between the drawing and the reality. But there was a real wonder in it too. You had mailed away for eggs that looked like dust and grown living animals on your own windowsill. They could last months if you did not overfeed them or cook them in a sunny window. Today, a child watches Sea Life in perfect color on a screen and never waits weeks for anything. Sea Monkeys asked for patience and rewarded it with actual, if underwhelming, life. Do you remember the plastic gears that drew perfect looping flowers if your hand never slipped? Waiting at number 91. Number 91, Spirograph. A set of plastic rings and wheels full of little holes, a few colored pens, and a way to draw a geometric flower so precise they looked machine-made. You pinned the big ring down, set a small toothed wheel inside it, poked your pen into one of the holes, and rolled the wheel around the inside of the ring. Out came a looping, overlapping spiral that closed into a perfect blossom. Spirograph came to American kids through Kenner in the mid-1960s, invented by a British engineer who worked with gears and springs for a living. The math behind it was real, the pattern traced by one circle rolling inside another. But no child cared about that. You cared about the colors, and about switching pens partway through, so the flower shifted from red to blue as it grew. The frustration was the slip. If your pen jumped out of its hole, or the little wheel skidded off the teeth, the whole clean pattern was ruined by one ugly stray line, and you started over on fresh paper. The pins that held the ring down could tear the page or mar the table underneath. Still, when it worked, a kid with no drawing talent at all could produce something that looked genuinely beautiful and hang it on the refrigerator. Today, an app spins out infinite perfect patterns with a fingertip and never slips. The Spirograph made you earn the pattern, one careful loop at a time. Do you remember the toy that made your voice come out of a computer and spell the words back to you? Waiting at number 90. Number 90, Speak and Spell. A bright orange slab with a real keyboard and a little red display, and a flat electronic voice that said, "Spell wrong," and waited for you to try. You typed the letters, and if you missed, it told you so and gave you another chance. And when you got it right, it congratulated you in that same buzzy monotone. Texas Instruments built the Speak and Spell in 1978, and it was a genuine breakthrough. One of the first toys that could turn text into speech with a chip small enough to sit in a child's lap. There were no cassettes, no records, no grown-up reading along. The machine itself talked. A generation learned that a plastic box could have a voice, and that voice became so famous, it turned up in the movie E.T. a few years later. The spelling drills were the point, but the wonder was the talking. You held it close and listened to how it pronounced the hard words. The screen was a dim red row of blocky letters, hard to read in daylight, and the voice mangled certain words in ways that made kids laugh and repeat them. It ran through batteries and cost real money, but it made learning feel like playing with a robot, which is exactly what it was. Today, every phone talks in a smooth human voice about anything at all. The Speak and Spell talked about spelling, in a voice no one could mistake for a person, and children adored it. Do you remember the storytelling bear, whose mouth and eyes moved along with a cassette tape? Waiting at number 89. Number 89, Teddy Ruxpin. A soft brown bear sat on the shelf, and when you slid a cassette into his back and pressed play, his eyes blinked and his mouth moved, and he told you a story in his own gentle voice. For a small child, it was uncanny and wonderful, a stuffed animal that seemed truly alive. Worlds of Wonder introduced Teddy Ruxpin in 1985, and the trick was a cassette that carried the story on one track and the motor cues for his face on another. As the tape played, tiny motors tugged his jaw and eyelids in time with the words, so it really looked like he was speaking to you. Kids sat close and watched his face, half believing. The magic wore thin as the tape stretched and the batteries faded, and then his voice would slow and drop into a low, warped growl that frightened younger children instead of comforting them. He was expensive, and the special books and cassettes cost more on top of him. When he worked, though, he was a bedtime companion who read to you when your parents were busy, and plenty of children fell asleep to his stories. Today, a tablet plays any story on demand, with animation and sound. Teddy Ruxpin was one bear with one moving face and a shelf of cassettes, and a child gave him a name and loved him. Do you remember the weighted plastic darts you hurled high into the air to land in a ring on the grass? Waiting at number 88. Number 88, Lawn Darts. Big plastic fin darts with heavy metal points. And the game was simple. You stood back and lobbed them underhand in a high arc, trying to land them inside a plastic ring, lying on the lawn 20 or 30 feet away. They came down point first and stuck in the grass with a solid thunk. For a backyard afternoon in the 1960s and 1970s, lawn darts, sold under names like Jarts, were a fixture at family cookouts and picnics. The whole appeal was the weight and the arc, the satisfying way a heavy dart buried its tip in the turf right where you aimed. That weight was also the horror of it. A dart that missed the lawn and came down on a person came down hard and pointed, and over the years, children were seriously hurt and some were killed. The United States banned the sale of lawn darts in 1988, and the game more or less disappeared from American yards. It stands as one of the clearest cases of a toy that was genuinely too dangerous to keep selling to families. There was skill in it, and grown-ups and kids competed for hours, but nobody who lived through the ban argues it was wrong. Today, a backyard game comes wrapped in foam and warnings. Lawn darts had a steel spike and trusted you to aim away from your little brother, and that trust cost too much. Do you remember the plastic shapes you baked in the oven and watched shrink down hard and thick? Waiting at number 87. Number 87, Shrinky Dinks. Thin sheets of clear plastic you colored with markers or pencils, cut out with scissors and then baked. In the oven they curled and writhed and then flattened, shrinking to a third of their size and growing thick and glossy and hard. You pulled out a tiny, sturdy charm where a big floppy drawing had gone in. Shrinky Dinks appeared in the early 1970s, the invention of two Wisconsin mothers who noticed how a certain plastic behaved in heat. The science was real, a polystyrene that had been stretched thin at the factory, pulling back to its natural size when warmed. For a child, it was pure alchemy. You drew a big loose picture, watched it shrivel and curl through the oven window in a way that made you certain you had ruined it, and then it settled flat as a hard little keychain or pin you could actually keep. The colors got deeper as it shrank, which surprised everyone the first time. The oven was the risk, since it meant a grown-up in a hot tray, and an overheated piece could fold onto itself and stick. But the result lasted, unlike so many toys, and you wore your creation on a backpack or a shoelace for years. Today, a child designs on a screen, and a machine prints the result. Shrinky Dinks made you draw it, cut it, bake it, and gasp when it worked. Do you remember the toy that let you cook rubbery bugs in a metal mold that got hot enough to burn? Waiting at number 86. Number 86, Creepy Crawlers. You squeezed thick, brightly colored liquid into a metal mold, shaped like spiders and worms and centipedes. Set the mold on a hot electric plate and cooked your own rubbery bugs. When they cooled, you peeled them out, floppy and shiny, ready to drop into your sister's shoe. Mattel sold the original Creepy Crawlers through its Thingmaker line, starting in 1964, and the gooey stuff, called Plastigoo, came in little bottles that smelled like nothing else on Earth. The hot plate was the heart of it and the danger of it. It got genuinely hot, hot enough to cure the goop into rubber, and hot enough to leave a nasty burn on a careless hand. Kids cooked bugs anyway, badges of honor and all. Half the fun was making the creatures, and half was using them, planting a rubber spider on a plate or in a lunchbox to make somebody scream. The smell of cooking Plastigoop filled the kitchen and stuck in your memory. Parents worried about the heat, and later versions swapped the open hot plate for a safer enclosed oven. But for the kids who had the early one, that exposed metal plate was part of the thrill, a real machine that made real things and demanded real care. Today, a factory makes every plastic bug identical and cool to the touch. Creepy Crawlers let a child be the factory, burns and smell and all. Do you remember the two plastic boxers you jabbed at each other until one head popped up on its spring? Waiting at number 85. Number 85, Rock 'Em Sock 'Em Robots. Two plastic fighters, a red one and a blue one, stood in a little boxing ring, and you worked them with two thumb buttons that threw their arms in clumsy jabs. You mashed the buttons, they punched, and when a good hit landed just right, the loser's head shot straight up off its shoulders with a loud clack, and the round was over. The red rocker and the blue bomber came from the Marx Company in 1964, and the game was as simple as two kids could want. You each grabbed a controller, leaned over the ring, and hammered away, jockeying to line up the punch that would spring the other robot's head. There was no strategy to speak of, just speed and luck and a lot of yelling. The mechanism wore out, and the next got loose, so an old set would pop ahead at the lightest tap, fingers cramped from mashing the buttons, and a heated match could end with the whole ring sliding off the table. But it was a real head-to-head contest. A child could win, and the pop of that head springing up was the most satisfying sound in the toy box. Today, two kids play the same fight on a screen with lifelike graphics and never touch each other's controller. Rock 'Em Sock 'Em put you shoulder to shoulder over a plastic ring, thumbs flying. Do you remember the game where you plucked plastic bones from a buzzing patient without setting off the light? Waiting at number 84. Number 84, Operation. A cardboard man lay flat on his back, red nose lit and waiting, with little openings cut into his body, holding plastic ailments you had to remove with a pair of metal tweezers. Touch the edge and a loud buzzer blared while his nose flashed red, and you lost your turn. Milton Bradley put Operation on shelves in 1965, and the patient, Cavity Sam, became a household face. Each little cavity held a joke piece, The funny bone, the wishbone, the Charlie horse, worth a certain number of pretend dollars if you could lift it out clean. The whole game was a test of nerve and a steady hand. The metal tweezers were wired to a battery, and the metal rim of each opening was live, so the smallest tremble set off that awful buzz. The pieces were tiny and easy to lose down the couch, and the buzzer was loud enough to make everyone at the table jump every single time. Kids with shaky hands hated it, and kids with steady ones lorded it over the rest. It never grew old, because your own nerves were the opponent. The little tweezers dangled on a thin wire, and the first bark of that buzzer made even a grown-up flinch. Today, a phone game vibrates gently when you make a mistake and quietly moves on. Operation shrieked at you and lit up its patient's nose, and the whole table laughed at whoever flinched. Do you remember the elaborate contraption you built piece by piece just to drop a cage on a plastic mouse? Waiting at number 83. Number 83, Mousetrap. Before you could catch anybody, you had to build the machine, and that was half the game. Piece by piece over several turns, players assembled a rickety Rube Goldberg contraption of a boot, a bucket, a bathtub, a diver, and a cage. And only when it was finished did you turn the crank and set off the chain reaction to drop the cage on a plastic mouse. Ideal released Mousetrap in 1963, one of the first mass-market games built around a working machine, rather than just a board and dice. The joy was in the setup and the pull of the crank, watching a marble roll down a chute to kick a boot, to knock a ball into a tub, to send a diver into a bucket. When the whole silly sequence worked, the cage really did fall. When it did not, and it often did not, you jiggled and nudged and swore until it went. The plastic parts warped and lost their fit, so the older your set, the more the machine failed at the last step. It took forever to build and fell apart if the table got bumped. But watching that contraption run flawlessly was a small triumph of engineering a child could feel proud of. Today, a phone runs 1,000 physics puzzles that never jam. Mousetrap jammed constantly, and fixing it was the fun. Do you remember the round little people who wobbled when you knocked them but would not fall down? Waiting at number 82. Number 82, Weebles. Little egg-shaped people with round, weighted bottoms, and no matter how hard you swatted them, they rocked and swayed and popped right back upright. The whole promise was in the jingle every kid knew by heart, that Weebles wobble but they don't fall down. Hasbro brought them out through its Romper Room line in 1971, and the science was hidden in the base, a low center of gravity that pulled them back to standing every time. They came in whole sets, a Weeble family, a Weeble tree house, a Weeble boat, and you could load them into their little vehicles and knock the whole thing over and watch them right themselves. For a toddler barely steady on their own feet, there was something deeply satisfying about a toy that refused to stay down. They were nearly indestructible, cheap to replace, and small enough to lose in the couch by the dozen. That small size was the only real worry, since the tiniest Weebles were a choking hazard for the very babies who loved them most. But they asked nothing of a child except a poke, and they gave back that reliable, funny little wobble every time. Today, a child taps a screen, and a cartoon bounces back with a sound effect. Weebles were real weighted eggs in your hand, and knocking one down just to watch it stand back up never once got old. Do you remember the rope with a ball on the end? You swung around one ankle and skipped over again and again. Waiting at number 81. Number 81, Skip It. A plastic ring went around one ankle, attached to a swinging arm with a ball on the end, and you spun it around and jumped the arm each time it came past your other foot, faster and faster, until you were hopping in place in a blur, counting your skips out loud. The Skip It became a playground and driveway staple in the early 1990s, and the best version had a little counter built into the ball that clicked up a number with every rotation, so you could chase your own record. It was pure aerobic fun disguised as a toy, and a good session left you sweaty and breathless on the front walk. The rhythm was the whole thing, the swing and the hop timed just right, and once you found it you could go and go. Miss the timing and the arm cracked you in the ankle, which stung and left a little bruise every kid wore without complaint. The plastic could crack, and the counter sometimes jammed, but it got children moving in a way few toys did, one foot hopping while the other swung the ball all afternoon. Today a child counts steps on a watch that tracks everything automatically. Skip It made you do the counting yourself, one hop at a time, and the little clicking number felt like a prize you earned with your own 2 feet. Do you remember the fat rubber ball with a ring around its middle you stood on and bounced down the block? Waiting at number 80. Number 80, Pogo Ball. A hard rubber ball squeezed in the middle by a flat plastic ring, so it looked like a little planet with a disc around its equator. You stood on the disc, 1 foot on each side, squeezed the ball between your ankles and bounced. Getting your balance was the whole challenge. And once you had it, you could hop down the sidewalk on this strange, springy thing. The Pogo Ball bounced into American driveways in the mid-1980s, a fad that spread fast through neighborhoods and schoolyards. Learning to ride, it took a wall to lean on and a lot of falling off. But a kid who mastered it could bounce and turn, and even go small distances without touching down. The ball gave a lively, unpredictable spring, livelier than a pogo stick and harder to control. The falls were frequent, and the pavement was hard, so scraped palms and knees came with the territory. The rubber could split if you left it in the sun, but there was real triumph in finally staying on for 10 bounces in a row while your friends counted. The disc was ridged so your feet could grip, and you steered by laning, wobbling down the driveway like a spinning top. Today a child jumps on a trampoline, enclosed in safety netting in the backyard. The Pogo Ball was one wobbly rubber sphere on the open sidewalk, and staying upright was an achievement you bragged about. Do you remember the plastic shoes on spring that promised to make you bounce with every step? Waiting at number 79. Number 79, Moon Shoes. Plastic frames that strapped over your sneakers, each with a set of thick rubber bands stretched across the bottom like a little trampoline for each foot. The idea was that every step would bounce, that you would walk on air, that you would feel like an astronaut on the moon. The plastic moon shoes many kids remember spread in the 1990s, though the dream of bouncing shoes went back decades before to clunkier metal versions. You buckled them tight, stood up wobbling, and took your first careful, springy steps across the yard. They did bounce a little, and they made you feel taller and stranger and a bit unsteady, which was most of the fun. The reality never quite matched the astronaut fantasy on the box. You did not soar. You lurched and hopped and worked hard to stay balanced, and the straps loosened, and the rubber bands stretched out over time. Ankles rolled easily on them, so a cautious kid stuck to grass. But the promise alone was intoxicating. Real bounce built into shoes you could wear, and every kid wanted to try. The rubber bands twanged under you with every step, and you clomped along a few inches off the ground with your arms out for balance. Today a child jumps at a giant indoor trampoline park with padded walls. Moon Shoes let you buckle the bounce onto your own 2 feet and stagger around the backyard pretending the grass was the surface of the moon. Do you remember the spinning seat you sat inside and turned by hand until the whole room blurred? Waiting at number 78. Number 78, Sit and Spin. A low plastic base with a seat in the middle and a steering wheel column you gripped with both hands. You sat, you grabbed the wheel, and you turned it back and forth, and the whole seat spun you around and around on the floor until the room went dizzy and wonderful. Playskool made the sit and spin a nursery staple through the 1970s and beyond, and its genius was that a small child powered it entirely with their own arms. There was no motor, no battery, just a kid cranking the top of the column left and right, faster and faster, building up a spin. The floor blurred, the walls slid by, and when you finally stopped you tried to stand and staggered sideways, laughing. That dizziness was the whole appeal. The safe, silly loss of control a toddler could summon at will and then stop whenever they wanted. The hard plastic could crack under a bigger kid, and a spirited spinner sometimes clipped the coffee table. Getting up too fast after a long spin ended more than one child on the carpet. But it taught balance in a rough and tumble way, and it spun out the wiggles on a rainy afternoon indoors. Today a screen spins a cartoon for a passive child to watch. The sit and spin made the kid do the spinning, both hands on the wheel until the whole world tilted. Do you remember the giant rubber ball with a handle you sat on and bounced across the whole yard? Sat on and bounced across the whole yard. Waiting at number 77. Number 77, Hoppity Hop. a big rubber ball nearly the size of a beach ball, with a sturdy handle sticking up from the top. You climbed on, gripped the handle between your knees and bounced, and each bounce carried you a little forward, until you were hopping across the lawn on a giant balloon. The hoppity hop and the many space hopper cousins that followed bounced through backyards from the late 1960s onward. Getting on took a running mount and a good grip, and then it was all about timing your bounces so you moved in a straight line instead of veering into the hedge. Races broke out, kid against kid, hopping madly down the driveway. The ball was soft enough to be safe, but firm enough to really launch you, and a good bouncer could cover real ground. It could go flat with a puncture, and a big enough bounce could pitch a rider right off onto the grass. Little arms tired from gripping the handle, but it was outdoor fun that ran on nothing but a child's own energy, and a whole afternoon could vanish into a bouncing race with the neighbors. Today a child bounces on netted equipment or watches someone else do it online. The hoppity hop was a fat rubber ball and a handle and the whole open yard, and you powered every single bounce yourself. Do you remember the two hard balls on a string you swung until they clacked together above and below your hand? Waiting at number 76. Number 76, clackers. Two hard acrylic balls hung from a string with a ring in the middle, and you jerked the ring up and down to make them swing apart and smash together, above your hand and below, faster and faster, until they clacked in a steady, deafening rhythm. Clackers, also called click-clacks, were a craze at the turn of the 1970s, and mastering them meant getting the balls to knock together both at the top of the swing and the bottom without losing the rhythm. The sound was the whole point, a sharp cracking clatter that filled the room and drove every adult to distraction. Kids competed to keep them going the longest and to make them clack the loudest. The danger was serious. The hard balls could shatter under the repeated impact and send sharp fragments flying, and swinging them badly meant a real crack across the knuckles or the wrist. Safety concerns eventually pulled the worst of them from shelves. There was a genuine skill to it, a wrist motion you either found or you did not, and the kids who could clack them steadily earned real respect on the playground. Today a fidget toy spins silently in one hand with no risk at all. Clackers were loud and a little dangerous and completely addictive, and the sound of them is stuck in the ears of everyone who was there. Do you remember the bald cartoon face you drew hair and beards on by dragging iron filings with a magnet? Waiting at number 75. Number 75, Wooly Willy, a cardboard card with a printed bald man's face under a clear plastic dome, and a pile of iron filings trapped inside, and a little magnetic wand. You dragged the wand across the plastic and pulled the black filings up into hair, a beard, bushy eyebrows, a wild mustache, until Willy had a whole shaggy new look. Wooly Willy came out of a small Pennsylvania company in 1955, and the trick was pure magnetism, iron powder sliding under the dome wherever the magnet led it. There was no wrong way to play. You gave him a beard, then swept it all clean and started over, dragging the filings up into whatever silly style you wanted. The satisfaction was in the control, the way the black powder followed your wand exactly, and in the endless do-overs. The dome could crack if you sat on it, and once it split, the filing spilled out and Willy was finished for good. The magnet grew weak if you lost it and found it too many times, but for a quiet car ride or a waiting room, it kept a child busy and needed no batteries and made no noise. Today a child draws hair on a face with a fingertip on a screen and undoes it instantly. Wooly Willy used real iron and a real magnet, and there was something almost magical about pulling a beard onto a cartoon man's chin without ever touching him. Do you remember the vinyl shapes you pressed onto a slick board to build scenes over and over? Waiting at number 74. Number 74, color forms. Thin, brightly colored vinyl shapes that clung to a slick, glossy board with no glue at all. Just a gentle static grip you could peel up and move 1,000 times. You built a scene, a face, a house, a rocket, and then peeled the pieces off and built something new. Color forms started in 1951, dreamed up by two art students who noticed how the smooth vinyl stuck to a smooth surface. The whole idea was reusable play, a coloring book you never used up, a sticker set that never lost its stick. Sets came themed around characters and places, a farm, a spaceship, a familiar cartoon, and a child could arrange and rearrange the pieces into endless little pictures. The vinyl felt cool and slightly rubbery, and pressing a piece down and watching it hold was quietly satisfying. The small shapes got lost easily, and a piece that fell in something sticky lost its grip forever. Left in the sun, the vinyl could curl, but it was clean, quiet play with no mess and no waste, and it let a child compose and recompose a scene as many times as they liked. Today, a child drags digital stickers around a screen and taps undo. Color forms were real vinyl you peeled with your fingernail and pressed down with your thumb, and building the same little world a new way each time never got old. Do you remember the drawing set with stencils that let you dress up outfits by rubbing a crayon over raised plates? Waiting at number 73. Number 73, fashion plates. A set of raised plastic plates you slid into a frame, each with part of an outfit etched into it. A top here, a skirt there, a pair of shoes below. You laid paper over them, rubbed the flat side of a crayon across the whole thing, and the mixed and matched outfit came up on the page in dark relief lines. Then you colored it in however you liked. Tommy's fashion plates arrived in the late 1970s, and the fun was in the mixing. Swap the top plate, swap the bottom, and you had a brand new outfit to rub out in color. A different look every time. The rubbing was oddly soothing. The way the lines appeared from nothing as you dragged the crayon, and the coloring after gave a child free rein. It was billed mostly at girls dreaming of designing clothes, and plenty of them filled whole notebooks with rubbed and colored outfits. The plates could slip if you did not seat them right, smearing the lines, and the crayons wore down fast. Storing all the little plates without losing one was a challenge, but it turned a blank page into a fashion sketch a child felt proud of, with no drawing skill required. Today, an app dresses a digital doll with a tap. Fashion plates made you rub the design up with a crayon and color it yourself, and the outfit felt like your own creation. Do you remember the magnetic drawing board you filled with lines and then wiped clean with a sliding bar? Waiting at number 72. Number 72, Magna Doodle. A gray drawing screen in a plastic frame with a magnetic pen on a string and a few magnetic stamps, and a sliding bar tucked along the bottom. You drew dark, thick lines with the pen, and when you wanted a clean slate, you dragged that bar across the bottom, and the whole picture wiped away in one smooth pass. The Magna Doodle came along in the 1970s, and unlike the Etch-a-Sketch, you drew freely with a pen instead of fighting two knobs. Inside was a thick fluid full of iron particles, and the magnetic tip pulled them up to the surface to make a visible line. The eraser bar had little magnets that dragged the particles back down and out of sight. Kids drew, wiped, and drew again endlessly, and the little stamps let you press perfect shapes into a scene. The pen was forever wandering off its string and getting lost, and without it the toy was useless. The screen could develop dead spots over years of hard use, patches where the line would not show. But it was quiet, tidy, portable play that never ran out of paper, perfect for a long wait or a car trip. Today, a child scribbles on a tablet and shakes it to clear. The Magna Doodle gave you a real pen, a real magnetic line, and that deeply satisfying single swipe of the bar that swept the whole thing clean. Do you remember the rock that came in a box with a pedigree and an instruction manual, sold as a pet? Waiting at number 71. Number 71, Pet Rock. A smooth gray stone nestled in a little cardboard carrying case with air holes and a bed of straw. Sold with a straight face as a pet that needed no feeding, no walking, and no cleanup. It came with a manual explaining how to make your rock sit and stay, which it did perfectly, because it was a rock. The Pet Rock was the brainchild of an advertising man named Gary Dahl in 1975, and it was a joke that swept the country for one strange season. The whole thing was the gag, the elaborate packaging, and the deadpan instruction booklet treating an ordinary landscaping stone like a purebred puppy. People bought them by the millions as gifts, laughing the whole time. There was nothing to do with it, of course, which was exactly the point and also its short shelf life. Once the joke landed, the rock went on a shelf and the fad passed within months. Some kids got genuinely attached to their rock and its little box, And that attachment was half the fun and half the punchline. Owners named their rocks and set them on a windowsill, and some even carried the little straw-lined box to school to show it off. Today, a child raises a virtual pet on a screen that demands constant attention. The pet rock demanded nothing at all and made a whole nation laugh at itself, which is more than most toys ever managed. Do you remember the soft-bodied dolls with their own birth certificates you signed to adopt? Waiting at number 70. Number 70, Cabbage Patch Kids. Chubby-cheeked cloth dolls with yarn hair and dimpled vinyl faces. And no two were exactly alike. Each came with a name already chosen, and a set of adoption papers you filled out and mailed in. So you were not just buying a doll, you were adopting a child. Coleco brought Cabbage Patch Kids to the mass market in 1983. Built on the soft sculpture dolls an artist named Xavier Roberts had been making by hand. The adoption idea was the whole hook, and it worked so well that parents fought in store aisles to get one during the holidays. Each doll's individual face, its own name, its birth certificate, made a child feel chosen right back. You signed the papers and swore to take care of your kid. And plenty of children took that oath seriously for years. The frenzy to buy them turned ugly some seasons, and they were expensive and hard to find at the peak. The yarn hair matted, and the cloth bodies grayed with love. But a Cabbage Patch Kid was a friend with a story and a name, and children carried them everywhere. On your birthday, a card arrived in the mail from the doll itself, signed as though from your very own adopted child. Today, a child collects digital characters that live inside a game. Cabbage Patch Kids came with paperwork and a promise, and a kid who signed those adoption papers meant it. Do you remember the sad-eyed stuffed dogs you rescued from a cardboard pound and took home? Waiting at number 69. Number 69, Pound Puppies. Droopy-eared stuffed dogs with sad, soulful eyes sold inside a cardboard carrier shaped like a doghouse or a pound kennel, waiting to be taken home. The whole pitch was rescue. These were lonely pups nobody wanted, and you were the kind soul who adopted one. Tonka launched Pound Puppies in the 1980s, riding the same adoption idea that made cloth dolls fly off shelves, and it worked just as well on soft-bodied dogs. Each one had a hangdog face, engineered to tug at a child's heart, floppy and forlorn, and a kid could not walk past the display without wanting to save one. You picked the saddest-looking pup, brought him home and named him, and suddenly he was not sad anymore. The stuffing flattened over time, and the plush wore thin at the ears, where a child rubbed them. They were simple, with no gimmicks and no batteries, which some kids found plain next to flashier toys. But that plainness was the charm. A pound puppy just needed to be loved, and children delivered, hauling them around by one ear for years. Each pup wore a tag with its own name, and the plush was soft enough to double as a pillow on a long car ride. Today, a child cares for a digital pet that pings for attention on a screen. Pound Puppies asked for nothing but a name and a hug, and a kid gave both without a second thought. Do you remember the soft, floppy pal nearly as big as you were, made to be a friend who sat beside you, waiting at number 68? Number 68, My Buddy, a soft-bodied boy Dale, dressed in overalls and a ball cap, about the size of a real toddler, made to be a companion rather than a baby to care for. The jingle promised he would go everywhere you would go, and for a lot of kids he did. Hasbro introduced My Buddy in 1985, and a matching doll called Kid Sister came along for those who wanted a girl. What set them apart was the pitch. This was not a doll to feed and change. This was a friend, a pal your own size to sit next to on the couch and take along in the car. Boys were encouraged to want one too, which was quietly progressive for the time, and plenty of them loved having a buddy. The floppy body slumped and needed propping, and the yarn-free molded hair could not be styled, which some kids missed. He was big enough to be a nuisance to store, but there was real comfort in a companion, doll your own height, one who never argued and always came along, and children grew genuinely attached. You buckled him into the seat beside you, sat him up at the table, and told him things you would tell no one else. Today, a child chats with a talking assistant that answers from a speaker. My Buddy did not talk back at all, and somehow a silent, overall-clad pal who simply sat beside you was exactly enough. Do you remember the soft worm that glowed a gentle green when you gave it a squeeze in the dark? Waiting at number 67. Number 67, glow worm. A plump little worm with a soft fabric body and a hard plastic head. And when you squeezed it, the head lit up with a warm, gentle glow. That filled a dark bedroom with just enough light. For a child afraid of the dark, it was a friend and a nightlight in one. Hasbro's Playskool brought out the glow worm in 1982, and its whole purpose was comfort at bedtime. A press on the soft body triggered the light in the face, which shone for a minute or so and then faded, long enough to chase away the shadows as a child drifted off. The face was friendly, a sleepy little smile, and the body was soft enough to tuck under a chin. The light needed a battery in the head, which made that part hard and lumpy against a cheek, and the bulb eventually dimmed. It was aimed at the very youngest children, so an older kid outgrew it fast. But for the years a child needed it, the glow worm was a nightly ritual, a squeeze and a soft green glow, and the courage to finally drift off. Today a child has a color-changing nightlight run by an app and a timer. The glow worm needed one squeeze and gave back a gentle light and a friendly face, and it got a whole generation of small children safely to sleep. Do you remember the doll that talked when you pulled the string at the back of her neck? Waiting at number 66. Number 66, Chatty Cathy. A doll with a ring and a string at the back of her neck. And when you pulled it and let go, she spoke. A real recorded voice saying one of a handful of little phrases. Pull again and she might say something else, so you never quite knew which line was coming. Mattel introduced Chatty Cathy in 1959, and she was one of the first talking dolls a child could truly play with. Not a novelty, but a companion who chatted back. Inside was a small phonograph, a tiny record spun by the pull of the string, and that was how her voice came out, scratchy and sweet. Kids pulled that string 1,000 times to hear her ask to play or say she loved you. The mechanism wore out with all that pulling, and an old Chatty Cathy's voice would slow and warp into something ghostly, which unsettled more than one child. The string frayed and finally broke, and then she went silent for good. But while she talked, she was magic, a doll that answered you, and children carried on whole conversations with her. Today a doll connects to the internet and holds a real chat. Chatty Cathy had a string and a tiny record and a few sweet phrases, and pulling that string to hear her voice was a small thrill every single time. Do you remember the baby doll that actually ate spoonfuls of food and wet her diaper afterward? Waiting at number 65. Number 65, Baby Alive. A baby doll that truly ate and truly wet, sold as the most lifelike baby a child could care for. You mixed up a little packet of pretend food, spooned it into her open mouth, and worked a lever or squeezed her, and she swallowed. A while later, her diaper was wet and needed changing, just like the real thing. Kenner brought out Baby Alive in 1973, and the eating and wetting was the whole sensation. A doll that did what a real infant did, and gave a child the full job of tending one. You fed her, you burped her, you changed her, and you started over. The trouble was the mess. The food packets ran out and cost money. The internal tubes clogged and soured if you did not clean them, and a neglected Baby Alive could grow genuinely gross inside. Real food substitutes gummed up the works. But the appeal was undeniable for a child who wanted to practice being a parent, the responsibility of a baby who actually needed feeding and changing. You stirred her food from a little powder packet, and the tiny spoon and bowl made you feel like a real parent at feeding time. Today a child cares for a virtual baby on a screen with no cleanup at all. Baby Alive made the job real, spoon and diaper and all, and a kid who kept her clean felt like a true little caretaker. Do you remember the round pastel bears who each stood for a feeling and lived on a cloud? Waiting at number 64. Number 64, Care Bears. Round, soft, pastel bears, each with a picture on its belly that told you what it stood for. A rainbow, a heart, a shining sun, a rain cloud. Every bear was a different color and a different feeling, and a child picked the one whose belly badge matched their own heart. The Care Bears started in the early 1980s as characters on greeting cards before they became plush toys, and then a cartoon. And the belly badge was the whole idea, an emotion you could hug. There was a bear for cheer, and a bear for grumps, and a bear for love. And collecting them meant collecting feelings. Kids lined them up by color and knew every name. Being tied to a cartoon and a card line, they leaned sweet to the point that some older kids found them too soft. the plush matted, and the printed belly faded with washing. But for the children who loved them, a Care Bear was a comfort object with a message, a soft friend that stood for kindness, and they were hugged threadbare. You knew every bear by its belly badge, and finding the one whose feeling matched your own was half the joy of the whole set. Today, a child collects emoji and digital stickers that stand for moods. Care Bears put the feeling right on the belly of a soft bear you could hold, and a kid knew exactly which one they needed on a bad day. Do you remember the girl with the bright hair who rode a horse and brought color back to a gray world? Waiting at number 63. Number 63, Rainbow Brite, a doll with a shock of orange-yellow hair, a blue and white dress, and star-shaped touches everywhere. The heroine of a world she filled with color. She came with her own sidekicks and her own horse, and the story was that she chased the gray away and painted the world bright. Rainbow Brite arrived from Hallmark in the early 1980s as a character property that spread to dolls, a cartoon, and a wall of merchandise. The whole appeal was color, a girl whose entire job was making the world less drab, which spoke to kids who loved anything vivid. The doll had that unmistakable hair and the star on her cheek, and children acted out her adventures against the gloom. She was very much a product of her moment, tied tightly to the cartoon and the marketing push. And when the fad cooled, she faded fast. The yarn hair tangled, and the bright dress dulled with play. But at her height, she was everywhere, and a child who loved Rainbow Brite lived in that colorful little world with her. That star on her cheek, and those stripes in her hair turned up on lunchboxes, bedsheets, and pajamas all over the house. Today, a child streams endless animated heroines on demand. Rainbow Brite was one doll and one cartoon, and a whole aesthetic of color and stars. And for a few years, a lot of kids wanted nothing else. Do you remember the dolls that actually smelled like the fruit and dessert they were named for? Waiting at number 62. Number 62, Strawberry Shortcake. Small dolls with round faces under big bonnets, each named for a fruit or a sweet. And here was the strange, wonderful part. Each one actually smelled like her name. Strawberry Shortcake smelled of strawberries, and her friends smelled of blueberries, lemons, and cherries. The scent was the whole gimmick, and it worked beautifully. Strawberry Shortcake and her fragrant friends spread through the early 1980s from greeting cards into a wildly popular doll line. You could tell the dolls apart with your eyes closed, just by the smell, and children pressed them to their noses again and again. Each came with a little scented pet and a name that told you her flavor. The scent faded over the years, which broke the spell, and an old doll from the attic smelled only faintly of anything at all. The molded hair could not be brushed, but the perfume was pure magic while it lasted. A doll you experienced with your nose as much as your eyes. And collecting the whole scented set was the dream. You lined the whole fragrant family along a shelf, and each little scented pet carried the same berry or lemon smell as its owner. Today, a child collects characters on a screen that have no smell at all. Strawberry Shortcake and her friends filled a bedroom with the scent of berries and lemons, and that smell is one a whole generation still remembers instantly. Do you remember the little troll dolls with the wild jewel-colored hair you rubbed for luck? Waiting at number 61. Number 61, Trolls. Squat little rubber dolls with round bellies, wide grins, and a shock of wild hair standing straight up in bright jewel colors, pink and green and electric blue. You rubbed the hair up into a point for luck, and you collected them by the dozen and lined them along a shelf or a desk. The troll doll was created by a Danish woodcutter named Thomas Dam in 1959, and by the 1960s, the craze had swept across America. The hair was the signature, that gravity-defying tuft you could brush and twist and always coax back up. Kids believed they brought good luck, and a troll went along to a test or a game for a little extra fortune. The cheap knockoffs flooded in fast, and their bodies could crack and their hair could thin. Some found their bug-eyed faces more strange than cute, but that oddness was the charm, and a whole collection of grinning trolls with rainbow hair was a small treasure a kid guarded closely. You tucked one in a pocket for luck on test day, and a shelf lined with their wild-haired grins was a small kingdom all your own. Today, a child collects glossy characters inside an app. The troll doll was a funny little rubber figure you rubbed for luck and collected, until you had a whole grinning row of them, and their wild-colored hair was unmistakable. Do you remember the tiny cars small enough to lose a whole fleet of in your pocket? Waiting at number 60. Number 60, Micro Machines. Tiny cars and trucks, so small a whole fleet of them fit in one hand, detailed down to the mirrors and headlights despite being smaller than a thumb. You could carry dozens in your pocket and lay out a whole city of them on a rug. Gallup made Micro Machines a phenomenon in the 1980s, and the pitch, delivered in famously fast-talking commercials, was that smaller was better and you could own more of them. The detail packed into that little body was the wonder. Real paint jobs and real shapes shrunk to the size of a lima bean. The playsets shrank the world to match. A gas station or a garage that folded out to scale. That size was the whole problem too. They vanished into carpets, air vents, and couch cushions by the handful, and stepping on one barefoot in the dark was its own special agony. A serious collector lost a fortune of them over the years, but you could carry your whole collection in a pocket, and building a tiny town on the floor with cars smaller than your fingernail felt like a secret little world. Today a child moves vehicles around inside a video game. Micro Machines were real metal cars the size of a bean, and losing one down the heat vent was a small tragedy every kid knew. Do you remember the pull-string race cars that screamed off across the kitchen floor at frightening speed? Waiting at number 59. Number 59, SSB Racers. A chunky plastic race car with a big flywheel inside, and a toothed plastic strip called a T-stick. You jammed the stick into the side, yanked it out hard and fast, and the flywheel spun up to a scream and sent the car rocketing across the floor faster than any toy car had a right to move. Kenner's SSB Racers, the letters standing for supersonic power, tore across American kitchen floors starting in 1970. The rip of that stick and the rising whine of the flywheel were the whole thrill, and the car really flew, fast enough to crash into a wall and take a chunk out of the baseboard. Kids raced them down hallways and jumped them off ramps. The gyroscope inside kept the car upright even at speed, which was the clever part. The T-stick could snap, and pulling it wrong scraped your knuckles raw. The cars were loud and hard to control, ricocheting off furniture, but the raw speed was intoxicating. A toy car that genuinely rocketed under its own stored power, and a good long rip sent it clear across the house. Today a child drives a car in a racing game with perfect control. SSB Racers gave you one violent yank of a stick, and then a screaming, uncontrollable rocket across the linoleum. And that was exactly the appeal. Do you remember the daredevil in the white jumpsuit? You wound up on a revving crank to jump his motorcycle over anything. Waiting at number 58. Number 58, Evel Knievel Stunt Cycle. A little figure of the famous daredevil in his white star-spangled jumpsuit, sitting on a motorcycle clipped into a crank-powered launcher. You cranked a handle fast, faster until the flywheel screamed, then hit the release, and the cycle shot forward and Evel roared off to jump whatever ramp or line of toys you had set up. Ideal made the Evel Knievel stunt cycle a smash in the 1970s, riding the fame of the real stuntman who jumped cars and canyons on television. The Energizer crank was the genius of it. You built up the spin by hand, then let it rip, and the bike could travel a long way and take a real jump, popping wheelies and crashing spectacularly. Kids staged their own death-defying jumps over stacked books and toy cars. The figure could pop off in a bad crash and go flying, and the crank mechanism wore out with hard use. Setting up a good jump took time and patience, but landing a long jump felt like glory. Your own tiny daredevil sailing through the air, and the crashes were half the fun. Today a child performs impossible stunts with a controller in a game. The Evel Knievel Stunt Cycle made you crank the energy in by hand and cheer or groan at a real jump across the living room floor. Do you remember the low green trike you steered with levers instead of a wheel and drifted around every corner? Waiting at number 57. Number 57, Green Machine. A low-slung three-wheeler in bright green and black. But instead of handlebars, you steered with two levers at your sides, pushing and pulling them to swing the back wheels around. It looked like something a kid's superhero would ride, and it drifted like a dream. The Green Machine came from Marx in the 1970s as the tougher, cooler cousin of the big wheel. The lever steering was the whole difference. It let you crank the rear wheels hard and slide the whole machine around a corner, spinning out on purpose in a way an ordinary trike never could. Kids who mastered the levers could pull long, screeching drifts down the driveway that left the neighbor's big wheels looking tame. It sat low and stable, so tipping was nearly impossible even during a hard slide. The lever steering took real practice, and a kid who never got the hang of it just went in clumsy circles. The plastic wheels wore flat with all that sliding, but a rider who could work those levers looked and felt like the fastest thing on the block, drifting sideways in a scream of plastic. Today a child pilots a vehicle through a game with a thumbstick. The green machine put 2 levers in your hands and dared you to slide it around every corner, and mastering that drift was a real neighborhood skill. Do you remember the electric race cars you charged up and ran flat out around a plastic track, waiting at number 56? Number 56, Sizzlers. Small race cars that ran on their own tiny rechargeable batteries, so they zipped around a track under their own power with no slot and no cord. You plugged a car into a charger for a couple of minutes, then dropped it on the track and it took off, whirring around the loops on its own. Mattel's Sizzlers came out in 1970, part of the Hot Wheels world but self-powered, and there was a hand-cranked charger, and later a bigger unit called the juice machine to power them up. The magic was cars that drove themselves, racing around a figure-8 track in a blur. No slot to keep them in line, just balanced on their own speed. Kids charged up 2 cars and raced them against each other around the loops. The charge lasted only a few minutes, so you spent as much time charging as racing, and the little batteries eventually died for good and could not be replaced. The cars flew off the track on a tight turn, but self-powered race cars were a marvel, whirring around under their own juice. And a good race down a long track was a real event. Today a child races cars in a game that never needs charging. Sizzlers had you crank up the charger, drop the car, and watch it tear around the track on its own for a few glorious minutes before it slowed and needed juice again. Do you remember the tiny cars that ran around a grooved track connected to a controller you squeezed for speed, waiting at number 55? Number 55, slot cars, detailed miniature race cars that ran in a groove down a plastic track, powered by electricity flowing through the rails and controlled by a hand trigger you squeezed for speed. Squeeze harder and your car flew. Squeeze too hard on a curve and it spun off the track entirely. Slot car racing was huge from the 1960s into the 1970s, with brands like Aurora and its AFX sets, and whole basements were given over to sprawling figure-8 layouts. The skill was in the trigger, feathering the speed so you took the corners fast without flying off, and racing 2 cars side by side down parallel lanes was genuinely thrilling. Serious hobbyists tuned their cars and built elaborate tracks with hills and crossovers. The cars derailed constantly on the turns, and you spent a lot of time reaching across the layout to reset a spun-out car. The little metal contacts got dirty, and cars would stall on the straightaway. Track pieces came loose and killed the power. But a good race, 2 cars screaming down the lanes with both drivers feathering their triggers, was as close to real racing as a kid could get indoors. Today a child races photorealistic cars on a console. Slot cars were real cars on a real track, and mastering the trigger so you never spun out on the big curve was a skill you practiced for hours. Do you remember the tethered helicopter you flew in circles around a control tower you held in your own hands, waiting at number 54? Number 54, Vertibird, a small helicopter tethered by thin wires to a base you held, with a lever and a dial to make it lift off, fly in circles, and dip down to hook and lift little cargo. You worked the controls, and the copter really flew, whirring around the base in a wide circle, while you raised and lowered it to snag a raft or rescue a tiny astronaut. Mattel's Vertibird took off in 1971, and the wonder was flight you actually controlled. A powered helicopter that lifted and turned and hovered at your command, all tethered safely to the base in your lap. There were rescue sets and space sets, each with things to hook and lift and carry to safety. Working the throttle to hover just right over the target, then dropping the hook to snag it, took a real touch. The wires tangled and kinked, and a bad crash could bend the rotor. The circular flight got repetitive, since it could only ever go in a circle around the base. But controlled flight in your own hands was rare and thrilling, and pulling off a clean rescue felt like piloting the real thing. Today, a child flies a drone with a camera or pilots aircraft in a game. The vertibird whirred around its tether while you nudged it up and down to hook a tiny raft. And getting the hover just right was a genuine little skill. Do you remember the wobbling water toy that snaked and sprayed around the yard with a mind of its own? Waiting at number 53. Number 53. Water Wiggle. A cap with a grinning face and a small nozzle screwed onto the end of a garden hose. And when you turned the water on full, the whole thing thrashed and snaked around the yard on its own, spraying wildly while kids chased and dodged it. Wham-O sold the Water Wiggle in the 1960s, and the fun was the sheer unpredictability. A hose that came alive and whipped around, soaking everyone as they ran shrieking through the spray. Nobody controlled it. The water pressure sent it flailing at random, and you just tried to run through the spray without getting knocked by the flying head. That flying head became the problem. The hard cap on the end whipped around with real force, and there were serious injuries and even deaths when the head struck children, which pulled it from the market for good. It stands with lawn darts as a toy that was simply too dangerous to keep selling. There was pure summer joy in it while it lasted, the chaos of a snaking, spraying hose on a hot day. But the danger was real and undeniable. Today, a backyard sprinkler is a gentle, fixed fountain a child runs through safely. The Water Wiggle whipped around unpredictably and soaked everyone, and its wild fun could not outweigh how badly its flying head could hurt somebody. Do you remember the small, hard rubber ball that bounced higher than your head off the sidewalk? Waiting at number 52. Number 52, Super Ball. A small, hard, dark rubber ball, heavy for its size, that bounced like nothing you had ever thrown before. Drop it and it came back nearly to your hand. Throw it down hard on the sidewalk, and it shot up over the roof of the house. Wham-O introduced the Super Ball in 1965. Made from a tough synthetic rubber the company called Zectron, compressed under enormous pressure into a ball that returned almost all the energy you put into it. That extreme bounce was the whole miracle. A hard throw at the pavement sent it rocketing skyward, and kids competed to bounce theirs the highest, chasing them across yards and into gutters. It bounced so unpredictably off any edge that a game could turn into a wild scramble. That very bounce made it a menace indoors, where it could ricochet off 4 walls and break a lamp in seconds, and many a Super Ball was confiscated. It bounced away down storm drains and over fences, gone forever. But nothing in a child's hand bounced like it. And the first time you threw one down and watched it clear the roof, you were hooked. Today, a child watches physics play out perfectly inside a game. The Super Ball was real rubber and real bounce, and hurling it at the driveway to see it soar over the house never stopped being a thrill. Do you remember the wooden toy on a string you flipped and walked and rocked to sleep? Waiting at number 51. Number 51, Duncan Yo-Yo. A simple wooden disc split in 2 halves with a string looped around the axle, and in a skilled hand, it became something close to magic. You dropped it, it spun at the end of the string, and you snapped it back up. Then learned to make it sleep, walk the dog, and rock the baby in the cradle. The Duncan Company turned the yo-yo into an American craze, starting in the late 1920s, sending demonstrators town to town to run contests and teach tricks. The whole appeal was mastery. Anyone could make it go up and down, but the tricks took real practice, and a kid who could walk the dog down the sidewalk or throw a clean sleeper drew a crowd. Contests filled schoolyards, and the winners were local heroes. The string was the weak point, forever tangling and fraying and snapping at the worst moment, and you learned to wind a fresh one. A cheap yo-yo would not sleep no matter how well you threw it, but a good Duncan in a practiced hand did tricks that looked impossible, and earning each one felt like a real achievement. Today, a child watches trick videos on a screen. The Duncan yo-yo put the string in your own hand and made you practice for weeks to land a single trick, and pulling off a clean, around the world in front of your friends was pure glory. Do you remember the tube of mirrors you turned toward the light to watch endless colored patterns bloom and shift? Waiting at number 50. Number 50, Kaleidoscope. A cardboard or metal tube you held up to your eye and pointed toward a light, and inside, Mirrors and loose bits of colored glass made a perfect symmetrical pattern that shifted into a brand new one every time you turned the end. No two views were ever the same. The kaleidoscope is old, older than almost anything else on this list, invented in the early 1800s and beloved by children ever since. The principle was simple: angled mirrors reflecting the tumbling colored pieces into a repeating flower of light. But the effect was mesmerizing. You turned the barrel slowly, and the pattern bloomed and collapsed and reformed into something new endlessly. A child could stare into one for a long, quiet while, hunting for a pattern beautiful enough to wish would stay. The cheap ones broke, the mirrors clouded, and pointed at a dim room it showed nothing at all. It did only one thing, but that one thing was hypnotic. A private little light show that never repeated, and it needed nothing but a window and a slow turn of the hand. Today, a child watches infinite generated visuals scroll past on a screen. The kaleidoscope was mirrors and colored glass, and the light from a window, and turning it slowly to watch a new pattern bloom was a quiet wonder that never wore out. Do you remember the toy pistol that fired a roll of paper caps with a bang and a puff of smoke? Waiting at number 49. Number 49, cap guns. A toy pistol, often shiny metal made to look like a real six-shooter, that fired rolls or rings of paper caps. You loaded the roll, cocked the hammer and pulled the trigger, and each shot struck a little dab of gunpowder with a sharp crack and a puff of sulfur smoke. Cap guns were everywhere in mid-century America, when every kid played cowboys and the backyard was the OK Corral. The bang was the whole point, a real report and a real wisp of smoke that made a game of cops and robbers feel dangerous and grand. The smell of a spent cap roll, sharp and sulfurous, is one every kid of that era knows. Rolls of caps were cheap enough to burn through a whole afternoon of shootouts. The caps could sting a careless finger, and the smell and the noise wore on parents fast. Realistic metal guns eventually raised real concerns, as they came to look too much like the genuine article. But for a generation, a cap gun and a roll of caps meant hours of backyard westerns, and the crack and the smoke were the sound and smell of summer. Today, a child fires digital weapons in a game with surround sound. Cap guns made a real bang and a real puff of smoke from a strip of paper, and playing cowboys with one in each hand was the whole neighborhood's afternoon. Do you remember the bag of little plastic soldiers you set up in armies across the whole living room floor? Waiting at number 48. Number 48, green army men. Small green plastic soldiers, sold by the bagful, frozen mid-action in a dozen poses. The rifleman, the crawler, the one throwing a grenade, the officer with binoculars, and the beloved bugler and the flamethrower. You dumped out the bag and set up armies across the whole living room floor. These little plastic infantrymen have been a staple since the World War II era, cheap and plentiful, sold in bags of 50 or 100 for pocket change. The play was pure imagination. There were no batteries, no instructions, just a mound of green men and a battlefield you invented out of couch cushions and books. You lined them up, staged the battle, and knocked them down one by one. And the ones with the flat bases stood better than the ones balanced on a tossed grenade. They were flimsy, and the thin rifle barrels bent, and stepping on one hurt like few things do. You lost them by the handful under furniture. But a bag of army men was hours of open play for almost no money. A whole war you commanded from the rug. You dug trenches for them in the sandbox, marched them across the coffee table, and buried the fallen to dig up again later. Today, a child commands digital armies in a strategy game. Green army men were a bag of little plastic soldiers and nothing else. And the battle lived entirely in a child's head, which is exactly what made it endless. Do you remember the little wind-up tin toys that clattered and sparked across the kitchen table? Waiting at number 47. Number 47, wind-up tin toys. Brightly lithographed tin figures with a key sticking out the side. And when you wound them up and set them down, they clattered to life. A walking robot, a drumming bear, a car that sparked, a chicken that pecked. They ran for a few seconds on the tension of the spring, and then wound down and stopped. Wind-up tin toys filled toy chests from the early 1900s through the post-war years, made first in Germany and later in great numbers in Japan. And they ran entirely on a coiled spring, no batteries at all. The charm was in the mechanism, the whir of the gears and the jerky, lifelike motion, and the lovely printed tin bodies painted in bright colors. You wound the key, let it go, and watched the little machine march or spark or flip across the floor. The tin edges could be sharp, and the springs broke or wound down for good after enough play. They ran only briefly, before needing another wind. But there was real craft in them, a tiny working machine that moved on its own, and the ones that sparked or somersaulted delighted a child every time. Today a child watches animated characters move on a screen forever. Wind-up tin toys ran on a spring for a few seconds and then stopped, and that brief, clattering burst of life was somehow all the more precious for being so short. Do you remember the ribbon of wooden blocks that seemed to tumble down over each other when you flipped the top one? Waiting at number 46. Number 46, Jacob's Ladder. A string of small wooden blocks joined by ribbons, and when you held the top block and tipped it, the blocks seemed to cascade and tumble down over one another in a rippling wave, though nothing actually came apart. Flip it, and the illusion ran the other way. Jacob's Ladder is one of the oldest folk toys in America, going back generations before mass-marketed toys existed, made at home from wood scraps and cloth tape. The trick was an optical illusion built from clever ribbon folds, so the top block appeared to fall through the whole stack, while the blocks only ever flipped in place. Watching it cascade was hypnotic, and figuring out how it worked was half the fun and often impossible. You flipped it back and forth, chasing the tumbling motion up and down. The ribbons wore and frayed with use, and a homemade one could come apart if the tape gave way. It did just the one thing, but that one thing looked like magic. A wooden waterfall that never actually moved, and it connected a child to a toy their great-grandparents had played with too. Today a child watches slick animation tumble on a screen. Jacob's Ladder was wood and ribbon, and a clever illusion, and watching those blocks appear to cascade down over and over was a quiet fascination handed down through generations. Do you remember the box with a crank that played a tune until a clown burst out and made you jump? Waiting at number 45. Number 45, Jack in the Box, a little metal box with a crank on the side, and as you turned it, it played a tinkling tune. Usually pop goes the weasel, slow and steady, building suspense with every note. Then right at the pop, the lid sprang open and a spring-loaded clown or puppet leapt out at you, and no matter how many times you played it, that jump got you. The Jack in the Box is centuries old, one of the oldest surprise toys there is, and the mechanism never changed much. A crank turning a music cylinder while a spring waited under the lid. The whole game was anticipation. You knew the pop was coming, you cranked toward it, and still your heart jumped when the clown burst out. For a small child it was thrilling, and a little scary in the best way. The clown's face frightened some children rather than delighting them, and the spring or the latch could wear out and stop popping. You had to stuff the puppet back down and reset it every time. But that mix of dread and delight, cranking the tune toward a surprise you knew was coming, was a pleasure a baby and a grandparent could share. Today a screen delivers jump scares on demand with sound and animation. The Jack in the Box built the suspense one crank at a time and sprang its clown at you the old-fashioned way, and the surprise landed every single time. Do you remember the little brown logs you notched together to build cabins and forts on the living room rug? Waiting at number 44. Number 44, Lincoln Logs. Small notched wooden logs, stained reddish-brown, that stacked and interlocked at the corners to build cabins, forts, and frontier stockades, topped off with green and red roof slats. You built a little log cabin on the floor and peopled it with whatever figures you had. Lincoln Logs were invented around the time of the First World War by John Lloyd Wright, the son of the famous architect, and they taught a kind of building that felt tied to the American frontier. The notched ends were the whole idea, letting logs lock together at the corners so walls stood square and solid. A child built a cabin, then a fort, then a whole settlement, and knocked it down to start again. The wooden pieces were sturdy and lasted for years, often handed down between siblings and even generations. The building was limited to squared-off log structures, so you could not make much beyond cabins and forts. Pieces went missing, and roofs never quite had enough slats. But there was something satisfying and solid about building with real wood that snapped together, and a well-made log cabin was a small point of pride. Today, a child builds anything imaginable inside a virtual world. Lincoln logs were real notched wood you stacked into cabins and forts, and the heft of them and the click of the corners locking together made a child feel like a real frontier builder. Do you remember the wooden spools and sticks you connected into wheels and towers and windmills? Waiting at number 43. Number 43, Tinker Toys. Round wooden spools drilled with holes around the edge and in the center, and a set of wooden rods in different lengths that fit into those holes, so you could connect them into wheels, towers, bridges, and spinning contraptions. It came in a tall cardboard canister with a metal lid you pried off. Tinker Toys arrived in 1914 and became a classic construction set for generations of American children. The genius was the spool with holes all around, letting rods radiate out in any direction, so your builds could go flat or reach up into 3 dimensions. Kids made windmills that actually spun, towers that reached toward the ceiling, and strange machines with no purpose at all. The wooden pieces were warm and pleasant to handle and stood up to years of use. The connections could pull loose if you built too ambitiously, and a tall tower came crashing down at the slightest bump. Finding the right length rod meant digging through the whole canister, but building something that stood on its own and even spun was a real accomplishment, and pouring the pieces back into that tall can at the end was part of the ritual. Today, a child assembles structures in a building game with infinite pieces. Tinker Toys were wooden spools and rods in a cardboard can, and connecting them into a windmill that actually turned in a fan's breeze felt like real engineering. Do you remember the metal girders and screws you bolted into cranes and Ferris wheels with a tiny wrench? Waiting at number 42. Number 42, Erector Set. A metal construction kit of perforated steel girders, plates, nuts, bolts, gears, and pulleys, and a little wrench and screwdriver to put it all together into cranes, bridges, Ferris wheels, and machines that actually moved. Some sets even came with a small electric motor to bring your build to life. A.C. Gilbert introduced the Erector Set in 1913, and it was serious business. Real metal engineering shrunk down for a child's hands. You followed the plans or invented your own, threading tiny bolts through the holes and tightening them with the little wrench until you had a working crane that lifted or a wheel that turned. The metal made it feel like the real thing, and a kid who built a motorized Ferris wheel had accomplished something genuine. The tiny nuts and bolts were fiddly and forever rolling off the table, and you needed patience and steady fingers to build anything big. Losing the little wrench brought the whole project to a halt, but the results were real machines, sturdy and metal and often moving under their own power, and that was a level of building few other toys reached. Today, a child engineers structures in a simulation with no loose parts. The Erector Set was real steel and real bolts, and tightening the last nut on a motorized crane that actually lifted was a triumph a child never forgot. Do you remember the chemistry set that let you mix real chemicals and run real experiments on the kitchen table? Waiting at number 41. Number 41, Gilbert Chemistry Set. A wooden or metal case that opened to reveal rows of little bottles of real chemicals, test tubes, a spirit lamp, and a manual full of experiments you could run yourself. You measured, mixed, heated, and watched things change color, fizz, and sometimes stink up the whole house. The A.C. Gilbert Company made its famous chemistry sets through the first half of the 20th century, and they were the real thing. Actual chemistry a child performed on the kitchen table under a parent's loose supervision. The wonder was doing genuine science, growing crystals, making color changes, testing what the manual promised. It taught a real feel for how the world worked. The danger, by today's standards, was remarkable. Early sets contained chemicals no one would hand a child now, and one notorious Gilbert set from the 1950s even included small samples of real uranium ore for experiments with radioactivity. Kids got burns, bad smells filled the house, and the risks were plainly higher than any toy today would carry. But the learning was real, hands-on, and unforgettable, and more than one scientist traced their start to one of these sets. Today, a child runs safe, simulated experiments on a screen. The Gilbert chemistry set put real bottles and real reactions in a child's hands, dangers and all, and mixing something that actually fizzed and changed color felt like unlocking a secret. Do you remember the spinning metal wheel that balanced on a string and defied gravity as long as it kept spinning? Waiting at number 40. Number 40, gyroscope. A small metal wheel mounted in a frame, and you wound a string around its axle, gave it a hard pull and set it spinning. Then as long as it spun, it did impossible things, balancing on the tip of a pencil, riding along a taut string, standing upright on the edge of a glass, seeming to laugh at gravity itself. The toy gyroscope was a science shelf staple through the mid-20th century, and it demonstrated a real and slightly mysterious principle: the way a spinning mass resists changes to the direction of its axis. The wonder was watching it defy expectations. A spinning gyroscope balanced where nothing should balance, and a kid could spend an afternoon finding new places to perch it. It felt like magic, even though it was pure physics. The string pull had to be sharp and clean, and a weak spin meant it toppled at once. The metal wheel wore its bearings and slowed over the years. It did only its one gravity-defying trick, but that trick was genuinely astonishing. Science you could hold and spin and set balancing on a string across the room. Today, a child watches physics demonstrations on a screen. The gyroscope was a real spinning wheel you wound and pulled yourself, and watching it balance impossibly on the edge of a glass felt like a small miracle you had made happen. Do you remember the little projector that threw cartoon slides onto your bedroom wall in the dark? Waiting at number 39. Number 39, Give-A-Show projector. A plastic projector shaped a bit like a flashlight or a toy camera, and you fed strips of color slides through it and cranked them past the light, throwing cartoon pictures up onto your bedroom wall in the dark. Each strip told a little story, a few frames at a time, and you narrated it yourself as you advanced the slides. Kenner's Give-A-Show projector lit up bedrooms from the late 1950s onward, and the whole appeal was running your own picture show. You turned off the lights, aimed it at a blank wall, and clicked through story strips featuring the cartoon characters of the day, making up the voices as you went. It turned a dark room into a tiny theater. The picture was dim, unless the room was truly dark and the wall was close, and the strips scratched and jammed in the slot. The bulb needed batteries that faded, but being the one who ran the show, clicking through the frames and telling the story, made a child the projectionist, the narrator, and the whole audience at once. Today, a child streams cartoons in perfect color on any screen in the house. The Give-A-Show projector threw dim little cartoon slides on the wall and made a child run the whole show by hand. And that darkroom theater felt like something you had conjured yourself. Do you remember the little robot that talked and told stories and quizzed you, all powered by an 8-track tape in his chest? Waiting at number 38. Number 38, 2XL Robot. A boxy little robot with a friendly face, a speaker grill, and a row of answer buttons. And inside his chest, he played an 8-track tape that let him talk, tell jokes, ask you trivia questions, and respond to your answers. Press the button for your choice, and he would tell you if you were right and carry on. Mego brought out 2XL in 1978, and he was one of the first toys that seemed to hold a real conversation, a teaching robot with a personality and a sense of humor. The trick was clever use of the 8-track tape, which had several parallel tracks, so pressing a button switched which track played and made it feel like the robot was responding to you. Kids loved his corny jokes and his patient quizzes, and he genuinely taught facts along the way. The 8-track tapes were bulky and wore out, and the technology tied him to a format that was already fading. He could only ever say what was on the tape, but the illusion of a robot who talked with you, joked with you, and taught you was strong, and children treated 2XL like a wise, funny friend. Today, a child asks a smart speaker any question and gets a real answer. 2XL ran on an 8-track tape and a handful of buttons, and the feeling that a little robot was actually talking back to you was pure wonder in its day. Do you remember the programmable tank you punched a sequence of commands into and watched roll across the floor on its own? Waiting at number 37. Number 37, Big Track, a chunky 6-wheeled toy tank with a keypad on its back. And instead of driving it directly, you programmed it. You punched in a sequence of commands: go forward this far, turn this much, fire the photon beam, pause, and then hit go, and it trundled off across the floor carrying out your orders exactly. Milton Bradley released Big Track in 1979, and it was a genuinely early taste of computer programming for a child. The keypad let you enter a whole string of moves, and the fun was planning the route in advance, aiming it to cross the room, spin around, blink its light and come back, then watching it execute your program without you touching it again. Get the numbers right, and it did just what you told it. There was even an accessory trailer it could dump on command. The programming was limited, and a small error sent it crashing into a wall or off in the wrong direction. It ate batteries and needed a big clear floor, but teaching a machine a sequence and watching it obey was a real thrill, and a kid who nailed a complicated program felt like a true commander. Today a child codes robots with apps and drag-and-drop blocks. Big Track had you punch commands into a keypad and watch your tank carry them out across the living room. And getting the whole sequence right on the first try was a genuine victory. Do you remember the handheld game with the glowing red wand that played tag, music, and memory games? Waiting at number 36. Number 36, Merlin. A red handheld slab shaped a little like a telephone, covered in a grid of light-up buttons, and it played several games in one. Tic-tac-toe, a memory game, a musical game where you composed little tunes, and a game of electronic tag. It beeped and blinked and challenged you, all in the palm of your hand. Parker Brothers put out Merlin in 1978, and it was one of the very first handheld electronic games a child could carry anywhere. The grid of buttons did double duty, lighting up and beeping for each different game, so one small device held a whole arcade. You played tic-tac-toe against the machine, tried to beat its memory challenge, and picked out songs on the button pad. The red lights were dim in daylight, and it ran hot on batteries that drained fast. The games were simple by any later standard, but holding a device that played several games, beeped its own music, and beat you at tic-tac-toe felt like the future in your hand. And Merlin went everywhere with a kid, in the car, in bed, on the porch. Today a child holds a phone with millions of games. Merlin had a handful of beeping games under a grid of red lights, and being able to slip a whole tiny arcade into your pocket was a marvel in its moment. Do you remember the handheld football game with the little red dashes you dodged down the field? Waiting at number 35. Number 35, Mattel Electronic Football, a slim handheld game with a small dark screen where glowing red dashes stood for the players, and you were a single bright dash trying to run the length of the field, dodging the blips coming at you by nudging a directional pad and hitting a button to brake for the end zone. Mattel Electronic Football came out in 1977 and set off a craze for handheld electronic games. There were no real graphics, just those red dashes, and yet a whole football game lived in them. You ran your blip up the field, juked left and right to avoid the defenders, and the little device buzzed and beeped as you scored. Kids played it under the desk at school and under the covers at night. The blocky red blips left everything to the imagination, and the game was simple and repetitive once you learned the patterns. It beeped loudly enough to give you away in class, but that was part of its legend. A football game reduced to glowing dashes that somehow gripped a generation, and being good at it meant real bragging rights. Today a child plays football games with lifelike players and full stadiums. Mattel Electronic Football was a handful of red dashes on a tiny screen, and dodging your little blip down the field for a touchdown was as tense and exciting as any game got. Do you remember the flat little cartridge game system? You could actually swap games in and out of by hand. Waiting at number 34. Number 34, Microvision, a flat handheld game console with a small square screen, a knob, and a keypad. And here was the breakthrough. You could swap the game itself. Each cartridge snapped over the front and even changed the button layout, so one device could play several different games, not just the one it came with. Milton Bradley's Microvision arrived in 1979 as the first handheld game system with interchangeable cartridges, a real ancestor of every handheld that came after. The whole idea was new. Instead of a device locked to a single game, you owned a library of cartridges and pushed a new one on when you got bored, changing both the game on the screen and the controls under your fingers. The screen was tiny and low resolution, a coarse grid of blocky pixels, and the games were simple. The unit was fragile, prone to failing in heat or cold or from a jolt of static, and the small library never grew very large. But the concept was revolutionary. A handheld you could load with different games one at a time, and holding that future in your hand felt genuinely new. Today, a child downloads endless games onto one device instantly. Microvision made you push a physical cartridge onto the front to change the game, and being able to swap one blocky game for another in the palm of your hand was a real glimpse of what was coming. Do you remember the calculator that ran backwards and quizzed you on math instead of solving it for you? Waiting at number 33. Number 33, Little Professor, a handheld device that looked exactly like a pocket calculator, with a face and a pair of glasses printed on it. But it worked backwards. Instead of giving you answers, it gave you the problem on the little red display and waited for you to type the answer, then told you if you were right. Texas Instruments made the Little Professor in 1976, and the reversed idea was the whole clever trick. A calculator solved math for you, but this one quizzed you on it, showing a problem like a number plus a number and a blank, and checking your work. It made drilling arithmetic feel like a game against a friendly little professor. Get it wrong, and the screen prompted you to try again. Get several right, and you moved up a level. The red display was hard to read in bright light, and the drills were plain arithmetic, nothing more. It ran on the same batteries every Gadget 8, but it turned math practice into something a kid would actually reach for, and beating the professor at a whole round of problems felt like winning. Today, a child practices math on apps with animation and rewards. The Little Professor was a calculator that quizzed you instead of helping you, and racing to answer its problems before it prompted you again made drilling your times tables feel like a contest. Do you remember the tiny handheld games with the flip-up screens and the tinny electronic tunes you carried everywhere? Waiting at number 32. Number 32, Tiger Electronic LCD games. Small, cheap handheld games with gray liquid crystal screens, each one dedicated to a single game, often based on a hit movie or arcade title. The characters were fixed silhouettes that blinked on and off in preset spots, and you moved your figure among them to dodge, jump, or shoot, all to a stream of tinny beeps and buzzes. Tiger Electronics made these handhelds by the truckload through the late 1980s and 1990s, and they were the games a kid could actually afford, cheap enough to line a shelf with. Each one played only its own game, and the LCD figures could only appear in the spots the screen was printed for. So the action was really you timing button presses to a fixed pattern. Still, they had licensed characters and just enough challenge, and they went everywhere, in pockets and backpacks and car seats. The gray screens were hard to see without good light. The sound was a thin electronic whine, and each game got repetitive once you cracked its pattern. They ate watch batteries, but you could own a dozen of them, and having a handheld version of your favorite movie or arcade game, even a crude one, felt like a small treasure. Today, a child plays those same arcade games in perfect form on a phone. Tiger handhelds were blinking gray silhouettes and tinny beeps, and mastering the fixed pattern of one felt like a real accomplishment you could carry in your pocket. Do you remember the little Nintendo game with two screens that folded shut like a wallet? Waiting at number 31. Number 31, Nintendo Game & Watch. A slim, elegant handheld with a sharp LCD screen, a clock in the corner, and a single simple game, juggling, catching falling eggs, guiding a fireman with a trampoline. Later versions folded open like a clamshell with two screens, a design that would echo for decades. Nintendo launched the Game & Watch line in 1980, and these were beautifully made little machines, far more polished than the cheap handhelds around them. Each played one game, but that game was refined and genuinely fun, with crisp LCD figures and just the right rising difficulty. The clock function meant it doubled as a watch you actually kept on the desk. Kids played them until the buttons wore smooth. Being one game per unit, you needed several to have variety, and they were pricier than the throwaway handhelds. The LCD action was still fixed silhouettes blinking in set position, but the quality was a step above, The games were tuned to perfection, and the folding two-screen models pointed straight at the handhelds of the future. You slipped it into a shirt pocket and played it under the desk, thumbs working the two flat buttons on either side of the screen. Today, a child holds a device that plays every game ever made. The Game & Watch was one polished little game and a clock, and its clean design and addictive simplicity made it a handheld people kept and treasured long after the batteries died. Do you remember the black box that hooked to the television and let two paddles bat a square of light back and forth, waiting at number 30? Number 30, Pong. A box that hooked up to your television and put a game on the screen. And the game was simple. Two white paddles, one on each side. A square white ball bouncing between them, and a beep every time you hit it. You turned a knob to slide your paddle up and down, and knock the ball back. Home Pong reached living rooms in the mid-1970s, after the arcade version had already made a sensation, and it was the first video game most American families ever owned. The whole thing was black and white, and made of squares and lines, and yet gathering around the television to bat a beeping dot back and forth felt like the future had arrived in the den. Two players, two knobs, one bouncing dot, and hours vanished. It played only that one game, tennis reduced to its barest bones, and once the novelty wore off there was not much depth to it. The beeps grated on parents, but it was the machine that made the television into something you could play with instead of just watch, and that alone made it unforgettable. Today, a child holds a console that renders whole worlds. Pong was two paddles and a bouncing square, and being the first family on the block to play a game on your own television set was a genuine thrill. Do you remember the wood-paneled console with the joystick and the cartridges that brought the arcade home, waiting at number 29? Number 29. Atari 2600, a console with fake wood paneling across the front, a chunky black joystick with a single red button, and a slot on top where you pushed in a cartridge to load a new game. Blow into the cartridge, push it in, flip the switch, and the arcade came home to your television. Atari brought the 2600 to living rooms in 1977, and it changed childhood, because now one machine could play dozens of different games, each on its own cartridge. You steered a blocky tank, guided a little man across a river of logs, cleared the screen of chunky invaders, all with that one stiff joystick and one red button. The graphics were simple squares and bright colors, but your imagination filled in the rest. Cartridges were expensive, so a big library took years to build, and games would glitch until you blew the dust out of the cartridge and reseated it. The single-button joystick gave your thumb a workout and sometimes cracked, but the 2600 turned the television into an endless arcade, and swapping in a new cartridge on a Saturday morning was one of the great joys of the era. Today, a child downloads thousands of games in seconds. The Atari 2600 had you blow in a cartridge and jam it into the slot, and the wood-paneled box under the television made a whole generation of kids into gamers. Do you remember the console with the disc controllers and the overlays that promised more realistic games? Waiting at number 28. Number 28, Intellivision, a console with a flat controller unlike any other. A round disc you pressed with your thumb to move in 16 directions, a keypad below it, and plastic overlays you slid over the keypad to label the buttons for each game. It billed itself as the smarter, more realistic rival to the competition. Mattel launched Intellivision in 1979 and pushed it hard as the console for grown-up, detailed games, especially sports, where its players looked more like real athletes than the blocky figures elsewhere. The disc controller let you move in more directions than a stiff joystick, and the keypad overlays gave each game its own custom buttons for plays and options. It felt more serious and more capable. The disc controller was awkward for games that needed fast, precise moves, and the overlays got lost, leaving you guessing which key did what. The controllers were not detachable, so a broken one was a real problem. But for sports and strategy, Intellivision delivered depth the rivals could not match, and its fans defended it fiercely. You slid a fresh overlay across the keypad for each new game, and those 12 buttons became whatever that game needed them to be. Today, a child plays sports games indistinguishable from television broadcasts. Intellivision had a thumb disc and slide-in overlays, and its more realistic players and deeper games made it the choice for kids who wanted their video games to feel a little more grown-up. Do you remember the console with the arcade-perfect games and the numeric controllers that outshone the rest for a while? Waiting at number 27. Number 27, ColecoVision, a console that arrived promising arcade-quality games at home, and for a while it delivered better than anything else, with sharper graphics and games that looked much closer to the ones you fed quarters into at the arcade. The controller had a short joystick, side buttons, and a numeric keypad on the face. Coleco released ColecoVision in 1982, and its big draw was a pack-in game that was one of the hottest arcade titles of the day, played at home in a version that actually looked like the real thing. That was the promise, the arcade in your living room, and for its moment it kept it, with brighter colors and smoother action than its rivals. There was even an add-on that let it play games from the competition. The keypad controllers were awkward, hard to hold and easy to fumble in a fast game. It arrived just before a great crash swept through the whole home video game business, which cut its life short. But while it shone, ColecoVision brought the arcade home more faithfully than anything before it, and firing up that pack-in game on your own television felt like a small miracle. Today a child plays arcade classics flawlessly on any device. ColecoVision delivered near-arcade graphics with a clunky keypad controller, and for a couple of years, it was the closest a kid could get to the arcade without leaving the house. Do you remember the game console with its own built-in screen that drew everything in glowing lines instead of blocks? Waiting at number 26. Number 26, Vectrex, a game console unlike any other, because it came with its own tall built-in screen, and it drew its graphics not as blocky dots, but as crisp glowing lines, sharp vector shapes that looked like the fanciest arcade games of the day. It stood upright on the table, a little arcade cabinet of your very own. The Vectrex arrived in 1982, and its vector display set it completely apart. Every other home system painted chunky pixels, but the Vectrex traced clean, bright lines, so its ships and asteroids and shapes were smooth and glowing in a way nothing else at home could match. It came with plastic overlays that clipped onto the screen to add color to the black and white lines. Having its own screen meant you never fought over the television, but it also made the whole thing bulky and expensive. The vector style suited only certain kinds of games, all lines and shapes, and it too got caught in the crash that took down so many systems. But it was genuinely special, a little arcade machine with a glowing line display all its own, and owning one felt like having a piece of the real arcade at home. Today a child plays games with graphics beyond anything an arcade ever showed. The Vectrex drew everything in glowing vector lines on its own upright screen, and its sharp, futuristic look made it one of the most distinctive machines a kid ever wished for. Do you remember the glove you wore on your hand to control the game by waving it through the air? Waiting at number 25. Number 25, Power Glove, a gray glove studded with sensors and a control pad on the back, and you wore it on your hand and, in theory, controlled the game by moving your arm through the air, pointing, grabbing, punching. It looked like something from the future and promised to change how you played. The Power Glove came out in 1989 for the Nintendo system, and it caught kids' imaginations partly because it starred in a movie that made it look impossibly cool. The dream was control by gesture, no more just pressing buttons. You would move your hand and the game would respond. That was the promise on the box and on the screen. The reality was clumsy. The glove struggled to read your movements accurately. It worked with only a handful of games, and playing well with it was harder than just using a normal controller. Most kids wore it a few times and went back to the standard pad, but the idea was electric. A glove that let you reach into the game with your own hand. And even though it barely worked, wanting one was almost universal. Today, a child plays games with full motion controls and virtual reality gloves that actually work. The Power Glove was ahead of its time and clumsy in practice, but slipping it on and imagining you could grab the game out of the air was a dream every kid of that moment shared. Do you remember the little gray robot that sat by the television and played the game alongside you? Waiting at number 24. Number 24, ROB and the Zapper, two accessories that came bundled with the Nintendo system when it launched. Meant to prove this was more than an ordinary game console. ROB was a small gray robot with a rounded head and arms that swivel, and he sat by the television and reacted to flashes on the screen to move real plastic pieces in front of him. The Zapper was an orange and gray light gun you pointed at the screen to shoot ducks and clay pigeons. Nintendo included both when the system arrived in America in 1985, and they were as much about convincing skeptical stores this was a new kind of toy as about the games themselves. ROB played along with a couple of games, following the flashing screen to stack blocks or spin gadgets. A robot buddy who played beside you. The Zapper aimed at the television, let you point and shoot at the ducks a little dog flushed out of the grass. ROB was slow and worked with almost no games, and he was quietly retired. The Zapper only worked on the old tube televisions and would not fire at a modern flat screen. But a robot who played the game with you and a gun you aimed at the television were pure magic in their day. And Duck Hunt in particular hooked a whole generation. Today a child aims and shoots in games with a simple controller. ROB was a robot pal by the television, and the Zapper let you shoot ducks off the screen. And both made the living room feel like the frontier of what a toy could do. Do you remember the fuzzy owlish creature that blinked, spoke its own language, and slowly learned to talk? Waiting at number 23. Number 23, Furby. A small, fuzzy, owlish creature with big blinking eyes, a beak, and ears that wiggled, and when you turned it on it chattered in its own babble language. Then, over days of play, seemed to slowly learn English words. It reacted to petting, to noise, to being turned upside down, and it never truly shut off. Furby arrived in 1998 and became one of the most sought-after toys of its holiday season, sold out everywhere and traded at wild prices. The magic was that it seemed to be alive and learning. Out of the box it spoke only its own gibberish, and as you played with it, more and more English crept in, so it appeared to be growing up under your care. It talked to other Furbies too, which delighted kids and unnerved plenty of adults. It never really slept, waking to chatter in the dark and running through batteries, and some found its babbling more creepy than cute. It did not actually learn. The English was there all along on a schedule, but the illusion was convincing. Still, a creature that blinked, reacted, and seemed to learn to speak felt genuinely alive to a child, and kids loved and fussed over them. Today a child talks with toys and speakers that truly respond. Furby chattered in its own language, and seemed to learn to talk under your care, and that illusion of a living, growing little creature made it the toy every kid begged for. Do you remember the little egg on a keychain with a tiny screen, holding a pet you had to feed day and night? Waiting at number 22. Number 22, Tamagotchi, a tiny egg-shaped toy on a keychain with a small screen showing a little digital pet and 3 buttons to care for it. You fed it, cleaned up after it, played with it, and put it to bed. And if you ignored it too long, it got sick and could even die. It demanded attention at all hours, and kids carried it everywhere. The Tamagotchi came from Japan and swept America in the late 1990s, a virtual pet small enough to clip to a backpack. The pull was constant care. The pet beeped when it was hungry or unhappy, and you had to press the right buttons to feed and tend it, day after day, watching it grow from a hatched egg into a full creature. Neglect it and it declined, which taught real responsibility and real guilt. It beeped at the worst times, in class and at night, and schools banned them for the distraction. A dead pet from a weekend of forgetting genuinely upset kids. But that was the point, a pet that truly needed you. And children took the job seriously, sneaking care presses under their desks. Today a child raises virtual pets in games that pause when they log off. The Tamagotchi never paused, beeping for food and care around the clock. And keeping that tiny pixel pet alive was a responsibility a whole generation carried in their pocket. Do you remember the little cardboard discs you stacked and slammed to flip and win from a friend? Waiting at number 21. Number 21, Pogs. Small cardboard discs printed with bright designs and a heavier disc called a slammer. And the game was part skill and part gambling. You stacked your Pogs face down, took turns throwing the slammer down onto the stack, and kept any that flipped face up. Play for keeps, and you could win a friend's Pogs or lose your own. Pogs swept American schoolyards in the early 1990s, taking their name from a brand of juice whose bottle caps kids first used for the game, a pastime with roots going back generations in Hawaii. The appeal was collecting and competing. You gathered Pogs with designs you loved, traded for the ones you wanted, and risked them in games at recess. A prized slammer and a stack of good Pogs was real playground wealth. Because you could play for keeps, kids lost their favorites and hard feelings followed, and schools banned them for the gambling and the fights. The cardboard bent and the designs wore, but for a couple of years, Pogs were the whole social world of recess, and winning a stack off a rival or landing a good slam was a triumph you carried all day. Today, a child collects and trades characters inside a game. Pogs were cardboard discs and a slammer, and the mix of collecting, trading, and risking them for keeps made recess into a marketplace and a battlefield all at once. Do you remember the flat metal bands that snapped around your wrist when you slapped them against your arm? Waiting at number 20. Number 20, slap bracelets. Flat strips covered in colorful fabric or shiny foil, and lying straight they looked like nothing. But you slapped one against your wrist, and it instantly curled up and snapped snugly around your arm. Peel it off, straighten it out, and it was a flat stick again, ready to slap on. Slap bracelets were everywhere in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and the snap was the whole thrill. That instant transformation from a straight band to a bracelet with one smack against your skin. Kids wore them, stacked up their arms in every color and pattern, slapping them on and peeling them off all day long. The satisfying curl and snap never got old. That snap became a worry when cheap ones wore out, and the metal band inside broke through the fabric, leaving a sharp edge that could scratch or cut a wrist, and many schools banned them. The covering peeled, and the band lost its snap over time. But at their peak, they were the coolest thing on any playground, and slapping a fresh one onto your wrist and feeling it curl tight was a small daily joy. You stacked 5 or 6 up your forearm in neon zigzags and animal prints, peeling them off to slap back on all through the school day. Today, a child wears a smartwatch that tracks everything. Slap bracelets did just one thing: curling around your wrist with a satisfying snap. And stacking your favorite colors up your arm was the height of playground fashion. Do you remember the gross-out sticker cards that parodied the cute adoption dolls? Waiting at number 19. Number 19, Garbage Pail Kids. Sticker trading cards showing cartoon kids with disgusting names and even more disgusting fates. Oozing, melting, exploding. A deliberately revolting parody of the sweet adoption dolls that were the rage at the time. Kids collected, traded, and stuck them everywhere their parents forbade. Topps put out Garbage Pail Kids in 1985, poking gleeful fun at the cuddly cloth dolls, topping every wish list. And the gross-out humor was the entire draw. Each card had a grotesque character with a punning name and a stomach-turning scene, drawn in bright, cartoonish detail. And half the fun was seeing how far they would go. You traded doubles, hunted for the ones you were missing, and stuck them on notebooks and lockers. Parents and schools hated them, and they were banned in plenty of classrooms for being crude and mean-spirited, which of course only made kids want them more. The gum inside went stale and hard, but the rebellion of them was the appeal. A card series built to disgust grown-ups, and completing a set of the grossest kids you could find felt like a small victory over good taste. Today, a child shares gross memes and cartoons online. Garbage Pail Kids were sticker cards designed to revolt every adult in sight, and trading for the most disgusting one in the set was a joyfully rebellious thrill. Do you remember the little microphone you spoke into that broadcast your voice right through the radio across the room? Waiting at number 18. Number 18, Mr. Microphone, a handheld wireless microphone that broadcast your voice over a nearby FM radio so you could sing or talk into it and hear yourself boom out of the family stereo across the room. Turn up the radio, grab the mic, and suddenly you were on the air, a rock star or a radio announcer in your own living room. Ronco sold Mr. Microphone through relentless television ads at the end of the 1970s, and the gadget worked by transmitting a weak radio signal that any nearby FM set could pick up if you tuned it to the right spot. That was the whole trick and the whole magic. You spoke and your voice came out of the speakers, delayed by a hair, echoing around the room. Kids sang along to records, staged pretend broadcasts, and, as the famous ad showed, leaned out car windows to serenade strangers. The range was short, the sound was thin and full of static, and it only worked if you carefully tuned the radio to its frequency. The novelty could wear off once you had heard your own voice a few dozen times, but there was a real thrill in being broadcast, however crudely, and a kid with Mr. Microphone put on a show for the whole house. Today a child records and shares polished audio with a tap. Mr. Microphone sent your thin, staticky voice through the radio across the room, and hearing yourself come out of the family stereo made you feel like a genuine star. Do you remember the tape recorder that let you slow down and speed up your own voice to fool people? Waiting at number 17. Number 17, Talkboy, a handheld cassette recorder with a pull-out microphone and a special trick, a variable speed control that let you slow your recorded voice down to a deep, spooky growl or speed it up to a chipmunk squeak. You recorded yourself, then played it back altered to prank your family and friends. The Talkboy became a must-have after it appeared in a hugely popular Home Alone movie in the early 1990s, where a kid used it to fool grown-ups. Demand was so high that the toy version, first just a movie prop, went into full production and flew off shelves. The whole appeal was the voice changing. You taped a message, dragged the speed control, and out came your words slowed to a monster or sped to a squeak, perfect for pranks and secret messages. It was also a real, working cassette recorder a kid could carry around and narrate their life into. The sound quality was thin, the tapes tangled, and the batteries drained fast. The novelty of the slow and fast voice faded once the pranks ran dry. But recording your own voice and warping it felt powerful, and every kid who saw the movie wanted to pull the same tricks at home. Today a child alters their voice with an app in 100 ways. The Talkboy was a cassette recorder that let you slow your voice to a growl, and taping a message to spring on your family was a prank that felt straight out of the movies. Do you remember the personal cassette player with the foam headphones that let you take your music anywhere? Waiting at number 16. Number 16, Sony Walkman, a small cassette player you clip to your belt, with a pair of lightweight headphones with orange foam pads. And for the first time, you could carry your own music with you anywhere, private and personal, playing just for you. You popped in a tape, pressed the button, and the whole world had a soundtrack. Sony introduced the Walkman in 1979, and it changed how people, especially young people, lived with music. Before it, music came from a stereo in a room, shared with whoever was there. The Walkman made it portable and private, yours alone through those foam-padded headphones. On the bus, on a walk, in your room with the door closed, you made mixed tapes of your favorite songs and played them until the tape wore thin. The batteries drained and dragged the tape speed as they died, warping the music. Cassettes tangled and snapped, and you wound them back together with a pencil. But the freedom was revolutionary. Your own private concert wherever you went, and a teenager with a Walkman and a good mixtape was in their own world. Today a child streams any song ever recorded on a phone. The Walkman played cassettes through orange foam headphones, and being able to carry your own music out the door and down the street for the first time felt like true independence. Do you remember the barnyard toy with the pointer and the string that told you what each animal says? Waiting at number 15. Number 15, Cience, a round plastic toy with a picture wheel of farm animals around the edge, and an arrow in the middle. You pointed at one, then pulled a string, and a voice announced the animal and made its sound. The cow says moo, the pig says oink. Later versions swapped the string for a lever, but the game was the same. Mattel introduced the Cience in 1965, growing it out of the same talking technology behind its pull-string dolls. For the youngest children, it was a first lesson dressed up as play, teaching animals and their sounds through pointing and pulling. You aimed the arrow, pulled the string, and waited to hear which animal you had landed on and the noise it made. The pointer spun around like a wheel of fortune, so you never knew quite where it would stop. The string was the weak point, forever fraying and snapping, and once it broke, the toy went silent. The voice slowed and warped as the mechanism aged, but it taught a toddler their first animals and sounds, and the anticipation of pulling that string to hear the cow Mood delighted small children over and over. Today a child taps a screen and hears any animal in an instant. The CNC made a toddler point the arrow and pull the string, and the little wait to hear which animal spoke was a first taste of a toy that talked back. Do you remember the plastic barrel full of little monkeys you hooked arm to arm into a long dangling chain? Waiting at number 14. Number 14, barrel of monkeys. A little plastic barrel that opened to spill out a dozen small monkeys, each with curved arms, and the game was to hook one monkey's arm through another's and lift, adding monkey after monkey to a dangling chain without any of them slipping loose and falling. Barrel of Monkeys came out in the 1960s, and the play was pure dexterity. You picked up one monkey, hooked a second on its arm, then a third, building a swinging chain, and trying to see how many you could lift at once before the whole thing came apart. It was simple, cheap, and oddly addictive, a test of a steady hand and a light touch. You counted your chain and tried to beat it. The monkeys were easy to lose, and a chain always broke at the worst moment, dropping half your monkeys back onto the table. There was not much to it beyond the one hooking game, but that one game was strangely satisfying, and building a long chain of linked monkeys without a single one dropping felt like real skill. The barrel itself, small and colorful, was half the charm. Today a child links characters together inside a game with a tap. Barrel of Monkeys was a dozen little plastic monkeys you hooked arm to arm, and stretching your chain longer and longer without a single slip was a quiet contest with yourself. Do you remember the game where you rolled the dice to build a bug from a body, head, legs, and eyes? Waiting at number 13. Number 13, Cootie, a game where you built a bug. Each player rolled a die and, depending on the number, earned a piece of their cootie. First the round body, then the head, then the legs, the eyes, the antennae, the tongue, snapping each plastic part into place. The first to complete their bug won. Cootie was created by a Minnesota salesman named Herb Schaper and became a hit in 1949, and it was a perfect first game for a small child. There was no strategy, just the luck of the roll and the joy of assembling a silly plastic bug piece by piece. You needed to roll a certain number to start with the body, then collect the rest in any order, and watching your cootie come together was the whole fun. It taught counting, turn-taking, and patience to children too young for anything complicated. The little legs and antennae were easy to lose, and a missing piece meant nobody's bug was complete. The game was entirely luck, so skill never entered into it. But for a young child, snapping together a goofy bug and being first to finish was a real thrill, and the wobbly finished cootie standing on its 6 legs was a prize. Today a child assembles creatures in a game with a tap. Cootie was a plastic bug you built one rolled piece at a time, and racing a sibling to snap on that last leg and finish your cootie first was pure early childhood joy. Do you remember the game with the plastic ships and the little pegs, where you called out squares to sink a hidden fleet? Waiting at number 12. Number 12, Battleship. 2 plastic cases that stood upright like little briefcases, each with a grid of holes and a fleet of gray plastic ships you hid on your side where your opponent could not see. You took turns calling out coordinates and marked hits with red pegs and misses with white ones, hunting for each other's hidden fleet until one of you had sunk every ship. The plastic pegboard Battleship came from Milton Bradley in the late 1960s, though the pencil and paper game behind it was older. The standing cases were the clever part, letting 2 players hide their fleets from each other while sitting face to face. You arranged your ships, then called a letter and a number and waited to hear hit or miss, slowly building a picture of where the enemy ships lay. The little pegs were tiny and rolled everywhere, lost by the handful under the table. A game could drag on with unlucky guessing, but the tension of narrowing down where a ship must be hiding, then calling the shot that finally sank it, was genuinely gripping, and the cry of hit or the groan of miss made every turn count. Today a child plays the same battle against the computer on a screen. Battleship was 2 upright cases and a scatter of red and white pegs, and the slow, tense hunt for a hidden fleet, ending in the triumph of sinking the last ship, kept 2 kids locked in for hours. Do you remember the game with the die trapped under a clear plastic bubble you pushed to pop? Waiting at number 11. Number 11, Trouble, a board game whose signature was the die, which you never touched, because it sat trapped under a clear plastic dome in the center of the board. You pressed down on the dome, it popped with a loud snap, and the die tumbled to a random number, and you moved your pegs around the track, sending opponents back to start if you landed on them. Trouble came out in the mid-1960s, and that popping dome, called the Pop-O-Matic, was the whole hook. No more chasing a die that rolled off the table, no more arguing over a bad throw. You just pushed the bubble, it popped, and the die jumped. Kids loved the pop so much they pressed it over and over out of turn. The game itself was a simple race, moving 4 pegs home while knocking rivals back, all decided by the luck of the pop. It was pure chance with no strategy at all, so a skilled player had no edge. The dome could crack after years of pressing, but that satisfying snap of the Pop-O-Matic never got old, and the swing of luck, sending a friend's peg all the way back to start, made for plenty of shrieks and laughter around the table. Today a child taps a screen to roll a virtual die. Trouble trapped the die under a dome you popped with your thumb, and that snap, followed by the cruel joy of bumping a rival back to start, was the sound of a whole family game night. Do you remember the game where you spun the wheel and drove a little car full of pegs through a whole pretend life? Waiting at number 10. Number 10, The Game of Life. A board game shaped like a journey, with a winding, three-dimensional track of hills and buildings, and a little plastic car you filled with tiny peg people as you went, picking up a spouse, children, a job, a house, and money along the way. Instead of dice, you spun a big, colorful wheel in the center that clicked around and landed on your number. The modern Game of Life came from Milton Bradley in 1960, and it walked a player through a whole pretend lifetime, from starting out to retirement. The charm was living out a life in miniature. You chose college or a career, got married and loaded a peg spouse into your car, added little peg kids as you passed the right spaces, and dealt with payday, taxes, and the ups and downs of luck. Filling your car with a whole peg family felt oddly real. The winner was simply whoever had the most money at the end, which taught a lesson some found a little cold. The tiny pegs were forever lost, and the spinner could stick. But spinning that wheel and driving your little car of pegs through the milestones of a whole life was a game a family could play together and laugh over, comparing whose pretend life turned out best. Today a child lives out endless lives inside simulation games. The Game of Life was a plastic car full of peg people and a spinning wheel, and steering your little family through jobs, houses, and paydays around that winding board was a family night everyone remembers. Do you remember the little metal ball and the set of jacks you scooped up between bounces on the kitchen floor? Waiting at number 9. Number 9, jacks. A small rubber ball and a handful of little 6-pointed metal jacks, and a game played on any hard, flat floor. You scattered the jacks, tossed the ball up, and in the time it took to bounce once, you scooped up a jack and caught the ball. First one at a time, then 2, then 3, working your way up as far as your hand and nerve would take you. Jacks is an old game, played for generations before it became a store-bought set, its roots reaching back to knucklebones, tossed by children in ancient times. The whole game was hand speed and timing. You threw the ball, grabbed the right number of jacks off the floor, and caught the ball before it bounced twice, and one fumble ended your turn. Kids played it for hours on porches and kitchen floors, chanting the rounds. The metal jacks were murder to step on with a bare foot, sharp-pointed and waiting in the carpet. The ball rolled under the refrigerator and was gone, but it needed almost nothing. Just a ball and 10 little jacks and a bit of floor, and the rhythm of bouncing and scooping was a skill kids honed and competed at endlessly. Today a child plays reflex games on a glowing screen. Jacks was a rubber ball and a scatter of metal points on the floor, and the quick, chanting rhythm of scooping them up between bounces filled countless afternoons on porches and kitchen tiles. Do you remember the little glass spheres you knuckled down and shot at each other inside a ring drawn in the dirt? Waiting at number 8. Number 8, marbles. Small glass spheres, each swirled with color inside, some clear, some milky, some with a twist of blue or green at the heart, and a bigger one called a shooter you knuckled down and flicked with your thumb. The classic game drew a ring in the dirt, put everyone's marbles in the middle, and you took turns shooting to knock them out of the ring and keep the ones you hit. Marbles go back centuries, and for American children through the first half of the 20th century, they were pocket treasure and playground currency. The game was skill and nerve. You crouched, set your knuckle on the ground, and flicked your shooter hard enough to knock a marble clear of the ring. And if you played for keeps, you took home your winnings. A big glass shooter with a good swirl was prized, and a boy's marble bag was real wealth. Playing for keeps meant losing your favorites to a better shot, and hard feelings and even bans followed. Marbles rolled away down every crack and gutter, but a good collection, held up to the light to admire the colors inside, was a source of deep pride, and winning a rival's best marble in a ring game was a triumph you remembered. Today a child collects shiny items inside a game. Marbles were glass and light, and a ring scratched in the dirt, and kneeling down to shoot your knuckle-down shooter and knock a prize marble out of the ring was a contest of real skill kids lived for. Do you remember the bundle of thin sticks you dropped in a pile and lifted one at a time without moving the rest? Waiting at number 7. Number 7, pick up sticks. A bundle of thin, colored sticks, and you held them upright in your fist and let them fall into a loose, tangled pile on the table. Then, one player at a time, you tried to lift a single stick free without disturbing any of the others. Twitch a neighboring stick, and your turn was over. Pick up sticks is an old game, played for generations with slivers of wood or straw before it came boxed with bright plastic or lacquered sticks. Different colors were worth different points, and the prized black stick, hardest to reach, was worth the most, so you used it carefully to nudge the others. The whole game was a steady hand and sharp eyes. You studied the pile, chose a stick lying free on top, and eased it out a hair at a time, everyone watching to call the smallest wobble. It taught patience and a delicate touch to even young children. The thin sticks broke and rolled off the table, and the game was slow, demanding real stillness. But that stillness was the point, a quiet test of nerve where the tiniest tremble cost you, and easing out the black stick from the middle of a tangled pile, without moving another, was a small, proud victory. Today a child plays reflex and precision games on a touchscreen. Pick up sticks was a handful of thin sticks dropped in a heap, and the held breath care of lifting one clean while everyone watched for a wobble was a game the whole family could crowd around. Do you remember the loop of stretchy rubber bands two friends held while you jumped and hooked the pattern with your feet? Waiting at number 6. Number 6, Chinese jump rope, a long loop of rubber bands strung together, and it took 3 to play, 2 holding the loop stretched around their ankles, and a third jumping inside and over it in a set pattern, chanting a rhyme, while the holders raised the loop higher, ankles to knees to thighs, as the jumper cleared each level. Chinese jump rope was a playground fixture for decades, especially loved on schoolyards and sidewalks, and the whole game was footwork and rhythm. You jumped in, out, and onto the stretchy bands in a memorized pattern, in time with a chant, and if you missed a step or tangled your feet, you traded places and became a holder. The rope stretched to hold 2 pairs of ankles apart, and skilled jumpers cleared it even raised to the thigh. It cost almost nothing, just a loop of rubber bands anyone could make, and needed only 3 kids and a bit of pavement. It required a group, so a lone child could not play, and the rubber band snapped and had to be restrung, but it got a whole cluster of kids moving together, chanting and jumping, and mastering a hard pattern at the highest level earned real playground respect. Today a child follows dance patterns on a screen alone. Chinese jump rope needed 3 friends, a loop of rubber bands and a chant, and hooking your feet through the pattern as the loop climbed higher was a shared recess game that belonged to everyone at once. Do you remember the big hoop you spun around your waist and kept going with a swivel of your hips? Waiting at number 5. Number 5, hula hoop, a big plastic hoop light and hollow, and you stepped inside it, gave it a spin around your waist, and kept it going with a rolling swivel of your hips, the hoop whirling around and around while you found the rhythm to hold it up. Whammo turned the hula hoop into a nationwide craze in 1958, and few fads ever spread so fast or so wide, with hoops spinning in every backyard, driveway, and schoolyard in America almost overnight. The whole game was that rhythm, the swivel that kept the hoop aloft, and once you found it you could go for minutes. Then try to walk, twirl, or spin two at once. Kids competed to keep theirs going longest, counting out loud while it whirled. It was cheap, it was simple, and it got everyone moving. It took practice to keep it up, and a beginner dropped it again and again, and the hoop cracked if you were rough with it. But there was pure delight in it. The whirl around your middle and the count climbing higher, and a whole street full of kids spinning hoops at once was a summer picture from that era. Today a child follows fitness, moves on a screen. The hula hoop was one light plastic ring and the swivel of your own hips, and keeping it spinning while the whole neighborhood counted along was a joy that swept the country and belonged to every kid on the block. Do you remember the metal coil that walked itself down the stairs step by step all on its own? Waiting at number 4. Number 4, Slinky. A simple coil of metal, and when you stood it at the top of a staircase and tipped the top loop over the edge, it walked itself down, step by step, flipping end over end in a smooth metallic ripple all the way to the bottom. Held between two hands, it slinked back and forth with a soft, shivery whir. Richard James invented the Slinky by accident during the Second World War, watching a tension spring tumble off a shelf, and it first went on sale in a Philadelphia department store in 1945, selling out almost at once. The magic was that it moved on its own, a plain metal spring that walked downstairs as if alive, powered by nothing but gravity and its own coils. You raced it down the steps, poured it hand to hand, and stretched it across the room. Stretch it too far or kink one coil, and it was ruined, a tangled snarl of metal no child could ever straighten again. It walked well only on the right kind of stairs, but watching that plain coil ripple down a staircase all by itself was hypnotic, and it cost so little that nearly every child had one at some point. Today a child watches physics tricks endlessly online. The Slinky was a coil of metal that walked down the stairs on its own, and lining it up at the top step to watch it flip its way to the bottom was a simple wonder that delighted generation after generation. Do you remember the four-wheeled skates that clamped onto your shoes and needed a key hung on a string around your neck? Waiting at number 3. Number 3, metal roller skates. Four-wheeled skates made of metal, and they did not come as shoes at all. They clamped right onto the shoes you were already wearing, gripped at the toe by an adjustable clamp you tightened with a special skate key, and strapped at the ankle. That key hung on a string or a shoelace around your neck, and losing it meant you could not skate. These clamp-on metal skates rolled American sidewalks through the middle of the 20th century, and for a whole generation, they were the taste of freedom on wheels. You clamped them on, tightened the key until they gripped your soles, and rolled off down the sidewalk, feeling every crack and seam in the concrete rattle up through the hard metal wheels. The whole neighborhood skated together, up and down the block, holding hands and racing. The clamps slipped, and a skate could pop off your shoe mid-roll and send you sprawling. The metal wheels had no give, so the ride was rough and a fall on the sidewalk hurt. But rolling down the block with the skate key bouncing on your chest and your friends alongside you was pure childhood liberty, and the sound of metal wheels on concrete carried down every summer street. Today a child skates on smooth molded boots with soft wheels. Metal roller skates clamped onto your shoes and turned with a key around your neck, and rolling down the sidewalk with the whole neighborhood rattling over every crack was one of the great freedoms of growing up. Do you remember the little red wagon you loaded with everything and everyone and pulled up and down the whole block? Waiting at number 2. Number 2, Radio Flyer Wagon. A little red steel wagon with a long black handle, 4 wheels, and a bed you could load with anything: blocks, groceries, a dog, a younger sibling, a whole afternoon's worth of hauling. You gripped the handle and pulled, and the wagon rolled behind you down the sidewalk, its wheels humming on the concrete. Antonio Passan, an Italian immigrant, built these steel wagons in Chicago and gave them the name Radio Flyer. And by the 1930s, the little red wagon had become one of the most familiar objects in American childhood. It was work and play at once. You hauled your toys to a friend's house, pulled your baby brother around the yard, loaded it with dirt and rocks, and dragged it up the driveway. And on a good hill, you piled in and rode it down, steering with the handle and praying at the bottom. The steel was tough and lasted for years, often handed down. The metal edges could pinch, and a wagon loaded too heavy and let loose on a hill was a runaway. The wheels rusted if you left it out in the rain, but that little red wagon carried the cargo of a whole childhood, and pulling it down the block loaded with friends and treasures, or riding it screaming down a slope, was a memory nearly every American kid shares. Today a child is hauled in a molded plastic wagon with cup holders. The radio flyer was red steel and a long handle, and loading it up and pulling it down the sidewalk, or piling in for a wild ride downhill, was the honest work and joy of being a kid. Do you remember the bicycle with the long banana seat and the high handlebars, the one that meant you were finally free, waiting for you at number 1? Number 1. Schwinn's Stingray Banana Seat Bike. This is the one you have been waiting for, a bicycle like no other, with a long banana seat you could almost fit a friend on, high-rise handlebars that curled up toward your chest, a small front wheel and a fat rear tire, and a tall sissy bar behind the seat. You clipped a playing card to the frame with a clothespin, so it slapped the spokes and made your bike sound like a motorcycle, and you tied on streamers that flew from the grips. Schwinn brought out the Stingray in 1963, styled after the chopper motorcycles and hot rods the older kids admired, and it became the bike every child in America wanted. This was the machine that meant freedom. The banana seat and high bars let you pop wheelies and ride with a friend perched behind you. And the moment you got one, your whole world grew, because now you could ride to the far end of the block, to the park, to a friend's house across the neighborhood, all on your own. Summer evenings meant a pack of kids on their bikes, racing and circling and coasting, cards clattering in the spokes, streamers flying, until the streetlights flickered on and every mother's voice called down the block that it was time to come home. That was the signal, and you took one last loop and pedaled in. The chrome rusted and the tires wore bald, and a spill on the pavement scraped knees and elbows raw. But nothing else on this list carried so much of what it felt like to be a child. The wind, the speed, the freedom, the whole neighborhood out together on two wheels in the golden hour before dark. Today a child's world is often a screen in a quiet room. The banana seat bike put you outside, on the move, part of a whole roving pack of kids, free until the streetlights called you home. And that freedom is the thing so many of us miss the most. These are the toys, gadgets and games that filled our closets and our yards, and then quietly slipped away. And the truth is, we do not